Welcome back to the course. Project meetings. Not always very popular with team members, but very useful for a project manager. So in part 2, I will show you how I feel you can get the most out of these meetings. But for this part here right now, I will show you more how it is done, the more traditional way of managing meetings. So project meetings can be used to coordinate work, influence and motivate the project team, and escalate issues or get assistance from the management team. So coordinate work and influence and motivate the project team, that would be more for your project team meetings, and this will be more for the steering committee if you attend them, or management team meetings. So as I mentioned already, there's two types of meetings. The project team meetings that you have with your team, this is the one that you are chairing. You invite all your team members and you chair the meeting, and you have the agenda and you will have minutes. And steering committee or any management executive meetings, these ones you don't really chair them, usually you are just a participant to this meeting. So let's take them one by one. So project team meetings, the traditional way, what you do is the project manager gets updates from team members. You go around the table and what did you do this week? Yes, that sounds good. And you take all this into account. After the meeting, you go in your schedule and you update your schedule and your issue register if any, and you write your minutes and you send it across. So it's also the opportunity for the team members to discuss issues. They don't always meet outside team meetings, so that's a good opportunity for them to discuss. You can of course coordinate the work. When one finishes a task, the other one can start in 2 to 3 days, so you have to coordinate this. And this is where you do your issue resolution. The steering committee, the project manager is there to provide updates, not to get updates anymore, but to provide high-level updates. And I will show you on the next slide the difference between the two types of meeting, the difference of detail that you need to give for each one of those. So now this is your opportunity to escalate major issues. I don't like putting big issues on the table during meetings, so I would usually go and have one-on-one chat or phone call to give everyone a heads up, and if possible have an issue resolution strategy ahead before I drop a big issue on the table. So that's something that I think is very important to do. So this is usually not chaired by the project manager, it's chaired by the steering committee member or the business owner or the likes. So two types of meetings, one where when you really have your outcome, what you want to get from the team, and another one when you're a participant and where the chair would have her outcome that she wants from the meeting. So this is your outcome and this is the steering committee outcome. That is to bear in mind. Welcome back. So we'll review reports a bit later on, but the slide here works for both, for meetings and reports. Trying to highlight the difference of content that you would have in meetings and reports depending on which type of project. So I mentioned there's two key meetings that you would attend, this one that you will chair, the project team meeting, and this other one that you will be a participant. Obviously there are tons of other meetings that you will be involved with, usually ad hoc, but this is really the two key ones. So if I take the components here one by one, we can check to which meeting it applies. So for instance, this one here, high-level update and status, update on key milestones, so that can be done for both types. Doesn't hurt to give your team an update on a high-level schedule, and for the steering committee, yes. A more detailed update on progress in the past week, what's happening next week, what have you done exactly, how did you go? Yes, that goes for the project team meeting. The steering committee don't need to know that. Finances, budget update, how we doing? It's really not needed for the project team meeting. Unless you have some resources that are really switched on with budget and the likes, but they don't, they don't come across very often. So I would say don't bother them with this, and sometimes it's quite confidential. They're not even aware of the budget of the project. Steering committee, yes. Management meeting, yes. That's a key thing they want from you at this stage. Small technical issues. Small project team, yes. Steering committee, management team, no. They don't want to know about this. And they wouldn't know if they have to worry about them or not, so don't mention them. Key project issues, yes, the one that will potentially delay the project, increase the cost, and the one that they can influence, yes, give these to both. Project team meetings, so they can work on them. Steering committee, potentially, so that they can escalate and assist. Action items, yes. Project team meeting, yes, they need to know what they have to do for the next meeting, and the impact if they don't do it. Action items, well, as mentioned, the project manager is not really chairing this one, but it's very important for you to have a look if you have any action items that you needed to do to report back to the steering committee. And if you manage to do that not too obviously, you can also give them action items during the steering committee. So if you're very subtle with that, that's something that you can do. Welcome back to the course. We've had our meetings. Always good form to send meeting minutes, if only bullet points, but usually you'll be provided with a template. So you can send the outcome of the meeting after the meeting to all meeting attendees. What I do is initially, if the template is too complex, I always try to remove some headings. Always like to simplify, because the more headings you have, the more parts you have in your meeting minutes, the more open you are to more or less putting in correct information, and that's provide you a lot of overheads as well. So I've provided you here a list of things that could go in meeting minutes. The attendees and apologies, that's quite important. If someone was not present when we made a decision, or if someone never turns up, it's good to have them on this list. Decision made during meeting, that's very important. So we all agreed on something, it has to be logged somewhere. A quick summary of discussion. So we don't want this person say this and then this other person replied this. I don't think we do this anymore. It's not very useful. What is the plan for the following period? That's something that we can do to get everyone focused. The action items are also important. If we come across a discussion point that needs resolution, then we log it in the action items. What are the key milestones ahead? Once again, to get everybody focused. If there's any concerns raised, so concern is not yet an issue, but it's good to put that down. First of all, they make them feel better because they know it's on a piece of paper, and then for you it's a bit of a heads up that something could turn into an issue. You can also go crazy and put all the change requests, the one that are outstanding or approved, so that gives the team a heads up if there is some work that is going to come their way that was not originally included. The key issues, it's always good form to review all the key issues. So you can double this with the issue register review, or you can just list the key issues here so you can get your updates on the issues by the issue owners. The key risks, I like to have the key risk as well, doesn't hurt, and that's opens to discussion. And they can have a look at the risk and say, well, I'd like to add another risk if all possible, and the likes. And then, yeah, so that's something else to reduce the issue of resource being not available. So I like to have all the leave requests listed here. So what are the key ones? Decisions. We want everyone to remember what has been decided, so there's no surprises, and we have agreed on a way forward. Action items, very important as well. People need to know that they have something to do by a certain point in time. The key issues, always. So that's more or less the types of minutes I would have. The key with the three key ones, decision made, action items, and key issues. And after, depending on the templates that you come across, or if you can make yours, maybe use this as a starting point. So to finish on project meetings, let's have a quick look at a template that I put together. It's in the resources. Another recommendation that I have is, if at all possible, try and send the meeting minutes before close of business on the same day. There's nothing like receiving meeting minutes of a meeting that was done 1-2 weeks ago, and you will see that that happens. So do it while it's fresh in your mind, and do it while it's fresh in meeting participants' mind as well. If you send the minutes while it's still fresh in their mind, the more likely they are to review it and provide feedback. Also, it will make you look efficient. I remember I joined a company and I had a meeting with everyone, all the stakeholders and the likes, and I sent the meeting minutes on the day with an executive summary in an email. And I had a lot of good feedback from everyone, so that was a good start. Okay, so that's pretty much it for project meetings. Next we go into project reporting. Welcome back to the course. Let's review project reporting. So we saw that sometimes with meetings minutes you can tweak them to your own preferences. With project reporting, it's more unlikely that you'll be able to just create your own reports. You might be lucky and you can do it, but most of the time you have their own templates. Having said that, even if you use their own templates, you can still tailor what's within each heading. And this is where I suppose you need to tailor the report to the audience. I mentioned that already. Deliver your reports on time. That would make you look very efficient. Even if there's problems on a project, if you deliver on time, it's always a good practice. The number and type of reports will vary depending on where the project manager works. Most of the time you would have the usual weekly reports that's more detailed for your management team and the likes, but sometimes the project office would put all the project managers' reports in one bucket for the monthly report. Sometimes you would have to report to your steering committee, maybe on a monthly basis. So how many reports you'll have to deal with if you're a project manager is really an unknown quantity. Having said that, I just wanted also to show you what can be included in a report. Just to reiterate, the reporting content can be tailored to the audience, but not really the heading. So here what I have is an overall rack status that we will see on the next slide what it is. A rack status for components, we'll see on the next slide. We'll have an executive summary. This is more for monthly or executive type of reporting. Have a project status, obviously how you're tracking against the schedule. You'll have the progress done in the previous period. That's usually something that they like, just to show that you have actually done something. What is the plan for the following period? So the period could be week or month, depending on type of report. List your achievements. So even if this is not something that they ask, I think it's good to give achievements, to give the project team a boost. The key milestone ahead, just to have everyone focused. The change request, that's something that you could have in a report. think it's always good to keep track of those, the one that have been outstanding, the one approved, or the one declined. Budget update as well, tracking against the budget baseline. Executive, that's something they'll be very interested in. The key issues, also, if you need to escalate. So project reports are usually for someone higher up than yourself. So it's always good to put them here, the high level ones, so you can get help for escalation. Same with the risks. Welcome back to project execution reporting. So when we saw the project reports, I mentioned RAG. So sometimes in your project reporting you need to provide a RAG status. So what is RAG? So RAG stands for red, amber and green. It's a color-coded way for you to provide a high-level visual on how your project is going. Sometimes executives have to go through 20, 30 projects and I see this project, green, 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 green. I don't even have to review them. This one, amber, ooh, start to have a look at, and red. So you probably guessed that green is good and red is not good. So there's no clear standard. So, and sometimes when you come in a company, they already have their own standards. They will say green means that you have this, amber means that you have that, red means something else. So green obviously is all is well. Amber, the way I see it, is some issue on the horizon that could impact the project. So things are starting to fall apart, more or less. Red, the project is currently being impacted. Another way to look at it is how much do you want your executives to pay attention to your project right now. Use it for yourself. If my project has some issues and I'm on top of them, they don't really need to know. So I just put the project green. If I know I'm going to need their help and I don't want to tell them at the last minute, I give them a bit of a heads up and I put it amber. And if I need help right now, I put it red. So let's have a look. Project components can be visually tracked using the RAG. Components that can be tracked. So I said this is a way to track your overall project status, but you can also use it for your schedule, for instance. You can say my project is going okay, green, but the schedule is starting to have a bit of amber to it. The budget also could be the same. You could be on track, your project would be green, but your budget is starting to fall apart. Anything else can have a RAG status. Communication, scope, stakeholders, happiness, resourcing, risks, issues. Some companies also have a bit of a formula. If you have 2 of those amber, then the project should be amber. For instance, if you have 1 red, the project has to be at least amber. If you have all greens and 1 red, it's still okay. So as you can see, many ways to use it, but it can be a very powerful communication tool. So now let's move on to the next part. So to finish out with this RAG status, sometimes there is a mechanical way for you to calculate your RAG status. And this is in the instance where your project has been provided with levels of tolerance around schedule and cost. So they would have, for instance, the first level of tolerance is 10%, and the second level of tolerance is minus 20%. So for a schedule, it's if your project is 10 months, so you would have, it's still okay if we deliver between 10 and 11 months, or 10 and 12 months for the second level of tolerance. So if we take this example for a budget, you have a budget of $100,000. If you realize halfway through your project that the cost to complete, which is a budget estimate at completion, EAC, is between 90,000 and 110,000, you are good. It is green. If, on the other hand, you realize that your budget at the end of the project will be smaller than 90,000 or bigger than 110,000, then you should put yourself amber on this. Unless it's even worse and your estimate will be under 80,000 or above 110,000. So that sounds a bit crazy, but most of the time, even if you're doing very well and you will be ending your project well below your budget allowance, then you have to report it as red and you have to explain why didn't you spend more money. I think the thinking behind this is that why are we so far off the mark? Why did we just overestimate and the like? So they want to really understand why, but some don't bother with this and just interested if we are going over budget or not. So that's it. That wraps it up for the rack status. So to finish on project reporting, as I did with project meeting minutes, I have included in the resources a template of a report that you could have. So feel free to go and have a look. In these instances, I've just filled a few bits and pieces so you can check out how it looks in real life. So you have the rack status here, you have the project summary, you have the key reporting stakeholders involved here. You write a quick status, completed this week, plan for next week. You provide a schedule update, so this is a milestone view. And you can even have a rack status not only for the overall schedule but for each task. I like this visual way, so you can it's very quick for them to see your status for schedule. Green, green, green. Oh, there's a red here. Let's have a look what it is. As opposed to just words. Budget overview the same. So here, green, green, green. Oh, amber. Server more expensive than estimate. So they can have a quick look. Key issues, that's the one that we want them to have a look at, and usually it flows on to escalation. So that's pretty much it. Next we go into cost. Let's continue with budget tracking. So this is obviously a very important part of project execution. On a regular basis we need to review what has been spent and calculate what is left to be done, so we can, add the two and check if at the end of the project will be good. So first, how do we calculate what has been spent? So what has been spent, we call that actuals. So that you know, so I'll be talking about actuals from now on. During planning, we split our cost into two categories. So there was time and material and there was fixed price. So how do we track actuals on those? So for time and material, you will need to use the timesheets and the hourly rates if you have human resources working on it. And you would calculate the total with the amount of hours and the hourly rate, so that will give you the human resource cost. You would have invoices for contractors as well, so that could be also for time and material, or that could be a fixed price invoice, so there will be no surprise there. Usually you would work with a finance department and they would have allocated a project code to your project. So you should be able to go to them and ask them, how much have I spent so far? So they would extract actually all the actuals from that code for your project. So that's just some ways that you can keep track of what has been spent. Let's continue with project execution, tracking budget. So during planning, you've put a project budget together. With this example here, it could be something like 100 days at this daily rate, I give you a budget. 50 days at this rate, give you a budget. Fixed price, 20 laptops, give you this. So your budget at the beginning of the project is 300,000. So I wanted to introduce you to a couple of terms, if you like. So estimate to complete, it's your estimate at one point in time of how much money you need to complete the project. The actuals, we just talk about those. That's actually the money spent overall until now. And the estimate at completion will be your estimate now, taking into account the actuals and the estimate to complete. So that's your estimate at completion. That means how much do you think you would have spent at the end of the project. That will become clearer with some examples. And that's a variation, so that would tell you if you overspent or underspent. So estimate at completion is to be compared with a project budget. Here's the magic formula. Estimate to complete plus actuals, estimate at completion. So beginning of the project, no problem, 300,000 to complete, estimate at completion 300,000. So now let's move to January. Step 1, we reassess all outstanding work. So that will be our estimate to complete. We asked the guys, how much time do you need to finish your task? And they said, I only need 90 days, I only need 90 days, and looks like these guys haven't started, so they said this the same amount, 50 days. So that gives you an estimate to complete, 276,000. Step 2, we go in our timesheets, we go into our contents, finance person, we check our invoices, and we gather only $18,000. So we re-estimate the overall cost, so we add this to this, what's left to be done, and what we have spent, and that gives us this amount here, 294,000. So initially we told our steering committee it will cost 300,000 to complete the project will cost us 300,000, and now it's only 294,000. So we are at the moment $6,000 ahead. If we were taking only this value, it'll be very difficult for us to assess if we're going to be meeting this $300,000 or not, but we need both. Okay, let's move forward to February. Same, we just asked the guys how long, but oops, this guy realizes something more to do, and is the estimate that's jumped. So the overall estimate to complete is 276. It's the same, it's just a coincidence. The actuals is 35,000. The estimate at completion is now 311,000. So this caused us problems. And now we are overspent. But it looks like in March we had a better run. Days outstanding 60 days, 60 days, and 60 days. So that gives us 192,000. So the actuals 78,000. Estimate at completion 270,000. So the variation from the budget is 30,000. So we're back on track. So it's a bit of a roller coaster, but it was more to show you that, you know, if you track without these two components, then it's meaningless in a way. So it's good to have both of those as factors for you to take into account. So this is it. This is how we track budget. It's important to do it in a structured way on a monthly basis. Sometimes we are being asked to do it on a weekly basis, but I suppose your best judgment to start with, and then depending on the standards that are where you work. So this is it for tracking budget. Welcome back, project execution budget tracking. Now I have an advanced category. So as mentioned, if you're a bit overwhelmed at this stage, feel free to skip this. We will be discussing earned value. So earned value is part of all the project management methodologies out there. It's a tool that you can use to track how is your project going. It's often explained in a very convoluted way, and this is where I really wanted to bring it down to its simplest form with two examples. The first one extremely simple, the second one a little bit more realistic. So let's do this. So earned value It's the value of what you have already done. It's a value of the work that the project has already produced. So when we had a look at budget tracking previously, what we did was we calculated the estimate to complete, and we added actuals, and that gave us the estimate at completion. So that was in a way looking forward. What is left to be done? Earned value, it's more looking back. How have we been doing? But at the end of the day, that should give you the same result. Example. We have 5 houses to paint. This is our project. We have a contractor. We pay him $10,000 per week. And he or she tells us there's 1 week to paint 1 house. So you have 5 houses to paint. Your total estimate is $50,000. So what's important here is that's an estimate, 1 week to paint a house. So you say he or she tells you, well, it takes me 1 week to paint a house, and there's 5 houses to paint, so your estimate would be $50,000. It seems quite straightforward. Now you come back 3 weeks later, and your actual is actually $30,000 because you are paying this company $10,000 per week. So after 3 weeks, you have spent $30,000. But when you check, you notice only 2 houses have been painted, and the third one has not even started. So the earned value, which is the value of what we have built so far, is $20,000. Because we were expecting $10,000 expense per house. But now we only have 2 houses painted, and we already paid $30,000, so it's not looking good moving forward. So here you go. So this is your first example. Let's continue with earned value. So earned value, value of what we have built so far, if it's greater than the actuals, then you are under budget. But as we've seen an example just before with the houses to be painted, when the earned value is smaller than your actuals, then you are over budget. You didn't get what you paid for in a way. So as mentioned, I wanted to give you another maybe more real-life example. Let's say we have a project to build 75 units without going into more detail. It's a very simple project. You just need 75 units of something built. So it's time and material. You were told it costs you $1,000 to build 1 unit. So build and material, this is where you will be doing your budget. It's a schedule-based budget in the orangey color, and you have planned to build 10, 10, 15, 15, 15, and at the end you should have your 75 units. So here we track the actuals, the money spent at the end of each month. So here we have end of Jan, we have spent 8,000, we have spent 10,000, we have spent 7,000. So at the end of March, we have spent 25,000. So here what we do is we calculate our earned value. We go and check how many units have actually been built. At the end of January, we see that 8 units have been built already. Alarm bells, because we're supposed to have 10. End of February, another 10. End of March, only 5. Okay, so let's have a look. So end of March situation. We're planning to have built 30. We have only built 23. And the under budget figure that we have now gives the project team a false sense of security. So you would be checking your budget. You would say, we cool, after 3 months, I've only spent $25,000, and that's ahead of my scheduled budget. I'm doing very well. But you have only spent 23 units. So I think the earn value is a good tool so you don't get too comfortable. So obviously this is a simple example in a way that it's very easy to check the earn value because you're just referring to units, so it's very easy to count how many units have been done. But I suppose, and this is where the theory sometimes doesn't work in practice, it's not always as easy to check the earn value of something. When you work with several teams and they all have their own products to create and the likes, it's not always easy to check how much they have produced. So let's have a closer look on this, what that would look like on a chart. So this is how you could represent it, bearing in mind you're still in the advanced section here. So we are in March here, same example, that we have spent only 25,000 when we should have, the planned value was 30,000, but we've only created this. So if you do that, put that on a chart, with this being the planned value, the actual cost being there, and the earn value being there. So the earn value in green, so this is what you have done at the end of March. In blue, actual cost, it's here, and the planned value, it's there. So that's really, it's a good visual way. If this goes high and this doesn't go as high, that means that you are spending more than what you have produced. Quickly, final example on earn value. This time, it's just to show you that the actual cost could be above the planned value. So it's more or less the same project, but the actual change. So plan unit to be built 30. We have only built 23. But this time, your actual is even above the planned value, so you're in an even worse situation than before. So that's just to show you that the actual cost here is above the planned value. So right from the start, there's something wrong. So that's it for earn value on budget. So it's quite a very good tool. If you can do it, I think it's a very good way to look back and check how efficient the team is. We have finished with budget and we also have finished with scheduling, but before we finished execution, I wanted to show you that the earn value can also be used to assess the schedule performance. I don't know if you've noticed that on the previous slides. So when we review the budget, we compared earn value with actuals to see if we are doing well with our budget. So if the earn value is less than what we have spent, we know we are behind budget, that will be having an overspent. But we can do the same with scheduling, but this time, instead of comparing the earn value with actuals, we compare the earn value with the planned value. So if the earn value is greater than the planned value, we have built more than what was planned to build by this point in time. We are ahead of schedule, and the other way around. So let's have a look at the example. I think it'll make it clearer. So for budget, we compare the actuals and the earn value. So here the actuals was bigger the earn value, so we knew we're not doing well with budget. And if we want to use this tool for schedule tracking, we compare this time the earn value with the planned value. So the earn value here is smaller than the planned value, so we are behind schedule. So it's quite an intuitive tool, maybe a fancy terminology to do something that we could do otherwise quite intuitively, but it's always a good tool, as I was mentioning earlier, to know. Welcome to project execution wrap-up. So we've completed our execution. As part of the execution, we still have the implementation. So that obviously depends on what type of project you're working on. It could be just flipping a switch and doing some post-implementation testing, or something that will require a full-on implementation that will take place over a weekend or the like. So there are just too many scenarios here to list them all, but that's the final step of execution. And the next step will be closing the project. So the execution is the most intuitive of all phases. This is where your lateral thinking really counts the most. This is where sometimes there's no rules, there's no processes to follow, and you just have to fix issues using your best judgment and your communication skills and all the tools that you can think of. So the key component of this phase are the schedule, the cost, the issue management, and the reporting. So when implementation is done, there's usually a type of what is called the warranty period, where the project team is still involved. If there's any challenges with the project, just to make sure that the project team doesn't run away as soon as it's implemented. So there could be some issues, and the project team will be the best skilled to fix them. So there's a warranty period of several weeks, or sometimes it can go to several months. But in parallel, you can start the last phase, which is closing. But before we do, don't forget the quiz, and I'll see you at the other side of this. Welcome to Phase 4 Closing Section Overview. So in this section, we'll not go through the usual role of the project manager, because the project manager's role is quite succinct and also, I believe, quite obvious in this phase. So we'll discuss the purpose of the closing phase and the closure of completed activities, the handover of all incomplete activities, and we will also review the lessons learned, documentation, and we will also review celebrations at the end of the project. So let's get right into it. Welcome to the final phase of the project, project closure. Towards the end of execution, we implement our product, our deliverables. Sometimes, as mentioned earlier, we have a warranty period where the project team needs to still support what we have delivered, as they have the knowledge at this stage. But failing that, we're just focusing on closing all activities. So the purpose of this phase is to tidy up, more or less. Key components: we close or hand over all activities. So what it means is we don't want to leave any loose ends. There's also lesson learned. What have we learned? What have we learned that will allow us to do it better next time? The key outcome that we are seeking is closure sign-off. Once the executive, the steering committee, or whoever signs off on a document, then we can formally say the project is closed. But sometimes it doesn't happen quickly, if at all. So as mentioned, sometime after implementation, all resources disappear. They are busy working on the project, so for the project manager, it's sometimes a bit of a challenge to keep everyone involved. The business don't get much value out of project closure. Now they have their product, so everybody is a little bit focusing already on other topics, and sometimes even the project manager doesn't get a chance to tidy things properly. So I will be presenting here the theoretical closure of a project. I mentioned that the closing of a project is very much project dependent, in a way that, depending on the type of project you're working on, the closing and handover activities could be quite different. So, but I just wanted to give you an example to give you an idea of, on a typical project, what the type of work you would have to do during the closure of a project. So I've split them into two categories. So those activities here, we're just closing, and those activities here, we handing them over to business as usual teams usually. Example of closing activities. So we have several categories. I've tried and put that into categories. So reports, resources, and lesson learned. So reports. The key document here is a project closure document. So that's a project manager role to put this document together. So that will encompass all the closure activities. So part of this document would have a stakeholder sign-off. And then we file and archive all the reports. Obviously, sometimes there's some project folders where you just file all this. The resources, so that could be various type of resources. That could be, obviously, you release all the resources, human resource that's still working on the project. But that also could be that you are, paying off all the final invoices, and you publish the final budget figures, and you work with your finance team to make sure that the numbers are all in sync. The final category I have is lesson learned. So lesson learned, we'll have a look at this on the next slide, but it's more or less when the whole team discuss what has been going okay during the meeting and what could have gone better. And then at the end of this meeting, or sometimes you just have a document that is being created without this meeting. But usually it's better to have a meeting and then you create this document. So the handover activities, on the other hand, that's something that we need to ensure that we are handing over to the appropriate team. So I've put that into two categories, deliverables and the risk and issues. So deliverables, when we hand over a final product, our bridge, our website, our software, we need to make sure that the stakeholders are happy with it, that the business owner is okay. So we need some type of sign-off, implementation sign-off, maybe project closure document. They need to say that they are fully satisfied and that we can move on. Operations documentation to the business as usual team. Say you build the bridge, you need to give all the operations, you have all the knowledge, so you need to give all the operations documentation to the team who will be maintaining this bridge. Website, the same thing, software, the same thing. So training is some type of train the trainer, so you need to ensure that as the knowledge is within the team, that you hand over that knowledge to a training team or to individuals. And also your project team needs to still be involved if there is a warranty. So they're probably shared with another project. You might not want to have the resource still working full-time on your projects just to support, so they probably need to be shared with other projects at this stage. And risk and issues. So in our issue log or issue register, we might have some issues that we didn't get a chance to complete. They obviously were not critical because we still managed to implement the product or the project. So they are probably minor issues, but the team that will be running with the product, the business as usual team, need to be aware of those and they need to fix them. So we need to give them this issue register somehow. And risk is not as obvious, but sometimes there are some risks that are still valid at the end of the project. Usually in a risk register you have risks that would come and cause issues to the project, but sometimes they are just risks that are there and that are ongoing, and therefore it'd be useful to give them to the business as usual team. That's not mandatory, so that's just a nice to have. It might not apply all the time. So I wanted to highlight how we could simplify this. We don't want to be the project manager who left without paying off his invoices. So I highlight this one as an important activity. We want to have a sign-off. This is key. We have delivered something, we worked really hard. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, stakeholders are happy with it and we have provided them with what they wanted. And then you know that you've done your job as a project manager. That is also required, otherwise that's going to come back. and haunt you in a way. So you need to make sure that the product can be supported moving forward. This seems to be quite a critical document, but it does not always get done. Obviously, if you go through all the methodology standards and the likes, they tell you this is absolutely mandatory, that has to happen. But with my 20 plus years experience, it does not happen that often. You're implemented, good on you, go to work on another project. So this is why I would really recommend that you have these three things done. On the next slide, we'll have a look at those two here. Post-implementation review. So I'm really strongly recommending to have a post-implementation review in order to get some lesson learned. It's a meeting that you would have with all stakeholders. Sometimes you don't want to have managers of resources because you want the resources to be able to talk freely. But it's good to have a meeting because you get everybody's point of view. Otherwise, if you write the lesson learned on your own, then that might be a little bit biased. So I would strongly recommend to have a meeting. So during the meeting, you review what has done right, what could have been done better, what was not planned for. Things happen in the middle of a meeting, and where does that come from? So you need to highlight it so that someone in a company doing a similar project, they can take that into account in their planning. So there's different structure that you can apply to this meeting. You can say, okay, what was done right in planning, for instance, what was done right in execution? How was testing done? Or how was stakeholder communication done? You can ask the stakeholders at the end, or the steering committee, how was, as a project manager, how was my communication to you? That's something that can be done. And then you can, after the meeting, you go back, you write all the lessons learned, then you have a document. Recognition and celebration. Should be planned in advance. So that adds an extra motivation to the team. So it needs to be planned. It shows that you value what they're doing, you value their work, and it's not an afterthought that, okay, the project went well, it's all implemented, let's go and celebrate. But it shows that was in your plan all the time. So that is project closure. So this is it. Wrapping up the project closure. So closing a project is a low risk phase for the project manager. The project has been implemented, and if it has been implemented without any challenges, then everybody can relax. So if you can manage to put a project closure document together, and in it have all the loose ends being addressed, all that you've done to really close the project, I think that would be very beneficial for you as a project manager. You would leave the project on a very good note, on a very positive note. That would leave a trace, if you want, of professionalism. So I strongly recommend it if you can. You know, if you want to dust off a project closure document somewhere, as usual, simplify it and then circulate it. And if nobody, respond, if nobody approve, if nobody provide feedback, then so be it. But at least you've done your part. Now we're due for a wrap-up of part 1 next. But before we do, don't forget the quiz. Welcome back to the course. Let's wrap up part 1. So let's review the key concepts, tools, activities that we have seen and how they can overlap over each phase. So I wanted to show you that processes are recurring during the project life cycle. So you don't see them just in one phase most of the time. You see them, across all phases. So we'll be starting with a concept that I haven't really discussed so far. I didn't want to muddy the water. I didn't want to overload you with information as we're going through the phases, to remind you each time, don't forget the approvals, make sure this is sign off and the likes. I mean, I think it has been evident in a way, but now is the time to see really what are the key approvals that we move across the life cycle of the project. So you can see approvals as sign-offs more or less. So during initiation, it's easy if we have a project charter. So this is signed off, and that means that the business is good to go. So this is done by the business. But we've seen also that the initiation doesn't always occur very formally. So in this case, some type of generic approval would be provided by the business or by the project office. So it's not always the project charter. During planning, there are two documents that are very important and that need to be signed off. The first one is a project management plan, which is a document produced by the project manager, and that includes all the planning information. That's usually signed off by the steering committee or by the business directly. And requirements as well, if applies. So if we are on a project that has requirements, then that needs to be signed off, and this document needs to be as thorough as possible. So during execution, there's a few documents that need to be signed off. So we don't always have this scenario, as we mentioned, during execution you don't always have design, testing and the likes, but you need some approval to go live, so that's definitely a given. And when applies, the design need to be signed off, so the business need to say, yep, this design agrees with my requirements. And the testing also, before the business test, we need to make sure that they are happy with the way we have tested prior to their testing, and also the business need to do their testing and they need to sign off on the overall testing. So closing, we do a project closure document if we're lucky, and that will be signed off by the business or steering committee, and that will definitely close the business. But we've seen that it doesn't always occur, and maybe just a final approval from the business or steering committee saying yes, we're good with what you've delivered. Now you can wrap things up and move on to the next project. So that's the one for approvals that I wanted to mention initially. The others, we've seen them. The budget. During initiation, an order of magnitude is sufficient, which is an high-level budget. In planning, we go more detailed. We go as detailed as we can to avoid any surprises during execution. And then during execution, we just monitor weekly, monthly. For very long project, you don't want to do this weekly, but sometimes you're not given a choice of how often you do that. And during closing, if applies, sometimes you return the unused funds, and sometimes you didn't get the funds to start with, so you don't have anything to return. The schedule, very similar to budget. High-level implementation dates during initiation. You don't have a detailed Gantt chart at this stage, but here you do get your Gantt chart more granular, and you get it signed off as well as part of the project management plan. During execution, obviously, that will keep you busy. Even if it's not an MS project schedule, just all the tasks, all the monitoring of everything that is progressing needs to be progressing within the agreed time frames. During closing, there's not much action. No one is really interested when exactly the project will be closing. Usually the sign off of the go live is more or less the end of it. but there are exceptions, of course. Risks. During initiation, we create our risk register in which we highlight the key risks to make sure the business know what they're getting themselves into. And then if we can, we get more funds for the risk mitigation. We found some risk that it'll be good to have some money to take action if the risk occurs. During planning, same thing, we update it if we find new risks. Still last chance to get more money. During execution, we monitor and we update it regularly. I like to have monthly meetings on risks. And during closing, same as budget, we return the risk contingency funds if not used. Issues. During initiation, unless you're very unlucky, there's no issues. But if they are, create your issue log a little bit earlier. Try to address them as early as possible, or at least plan for them to be addressed. During planning, you definitely create your issue log and you start addressing issues. So the issue resolution exercise is starting there. During execution, you continue to update your issue log, you monitor your issue log, you have owners and timeframes, and you keep a close eye on those. And then you address issues, if you can. During closing, you would have two types of issues in your issue register. You would have the closed one that you don't need to worry about anymore, and you would have the open ones. With the open ones, you'll have to decide, what do I do with those? You discuss with the project team, you discuss with the BAU, and you decide for each issue, can we close it because the project is finished, or do we hand them over to the BAU team? Scope. During initiation, we ensure the key component, the big chunks, are listed. They need to be clearly stated. Although they are big chunks, they need to be clearly stated. Make sure that we don't forget any big chunks that will cost us later on. During planning, back to the granular as possible requirements and scope to ensure no misunderstanding during execution. So we have our overall scope, but we also have our detailed requirements from the business. And if we feel the requirements are not detailed enough, we have to go back to them. Otherwise, we'll be managing scope during the full execution. So during execution, there's only one thing to do. If the business asks for a new requirement, we need to go through the change request process. Sometimes we have a little bit of leeway, if you like. We can decide if the change is small, then we can slip it through, but it depends on which environment you're in. And during closing, what we do is we make sure that all original requirements documents are updated with change of scope. So here we created our requirements document at the end of planning that was signed off. But on top of these original requirements, we might have some change request here. So we need to make sure that we update this document here with all the changes. So sometimes it's done on a case-by-case basis, but sometimes it's just overall wrap up in the end. So if someone comes to the business as usual team and say, oh, you had a project, what were the requirements of the project, then you can show them the full document. And to finish, the project manager paperwork. During initiation, there's just a project charter. During planning, there's project management plan. So obviously there's other paperwork around, project approach, cost, schedule, but the project management plan should be a summary of all that has been decided, and that would include cost, schedule, approach, and the likes. So during execution, there are two types of documents that the project manager needs to work on. It's minutes and reports. The reports, important. And during closing, if you can put a project closure document together, and lesson learned document even better. So that's it. Another way to look at this table is if you want to refresh your memory during initiation, what it needs to be done. During planning, what needs to be done, and you go down this list. Execution and closing, what needs to be done. Another point of note is that during initiation, paperwork for the project manager is called project charter. During planning is called project management plan. But you'll see in part 3 when we review project management standards that they can have different names. So I believe those are the most common names. So that's why I've noted them this way, but you might come across, especially for Prince 2, which is a project management method, that they can have different names as well. But you'll know definitely if they are part of initiation or planning. Welcome back to the course. We continue the part 1 recap. I just wanted to have a quick review on how the project manager can adapt to each phase. So during initiation, it is the point in time in a project where it is the easiest to make any schedule or budget changes. It's not always possible. Sometimes there's an amount of money on the table and you have to take it. But it's much easier to do it now than to do it in the middle of the execution. So for that reason, the project manager needs to be able to anticipate. And when you look at across the 4 phases in initiation, this is when I feel the project manager needs to have the most foresight. He needs to be able to have a look with little information and little time that he has or she has. Planning, the execution, the closing, and the benefit realization. The project manager needs to be able to have a look at all these future phases and at the benefit realization and check that maybe a piece of paper with 20 lines sometimes has it all to take care of all these components. Or you could argue benefit realization is not really your problem. It's a business. If they do it, they know what they're doing, but I think it's very good practice to challenge things if you can, very tactfully. So here, foresight, anticipate, and if you can, if you see something that is amiss, then try and change it. Try and get more money for it. Try and buy more time. Planning. Thoroughness. During planning, we are meticulous. We look at everything in more detail. We want to make sure we don't discover things there. During planning, we only look at execution, really. Although initiation, you have to look at all that. During planning, we know what needs to be done. We've had sign-off, so we need to focus on the execution phase. We need to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible, so we are very thorough. During execution, we just have to do it. We need to be extremely proactive. I've also mentioned this is where we need to use our lateral thinking the most. Sometimes there's no processes to help us. But we need to be proactive to anticipate and control. So there is really at this stage no need for extreme thoroughness. That's too late for it in a way. That was during planning. Now let's just do it. And during closing, time for reflection, really. Obviously, you want to leave something clean behind you, so clean things up as much as possible. But you've been working with a team for sometimes months, and it's time to reflect on the quality of the work, and it's time to give kudos to people. Say well done and thank you for the work. So as a project manager, you don't always get team members come to you and say thank you for what you've done. But as a project manager, I see it really as my role to go and thank them for the hard work that they've done. And also, if you have the post-implementation review, you can ensure that the next time a similar project is being done, they can learn from you, from what you have done. So closing, well, it's a good opportunity to leave a good impression of yourself. If you thank people and if you close cleanly, so then people maybe will ask you to do another project for them. So all those qualities of focused activities have to occur at each point of each phase, of course. But I think that this is where foresight is most needed, thoroughness most needed, proactivity is most needed, reflection most needed. Okay, we're almost there. Thank you very much for attending part 1 of this course. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that I really enjoy doing it myself. Before we move on to part 2, I wanted to leave you with a quote from Jack Dorsey that I think represents the philosophy of part 1. As part of my commitment to this course, I wanted to try as much as possible and be practical and to simplify some project management components which sometimes are being shown as very complex. So when you simplify, it doesn't mean that you are not doing a good job, doesn't mean that you're leaving things aside. But simplification, in a way, it's very difficult because you have to bring things down to fewer elements, to fewer components. I was mentioning, for instance, the project charter and the project management plan. They can be extremely complex. You try and simplify them. If you have a simple report, simple minutes, simple of everything, ensuring that the key stuff are in there, then you're more likely to have something of good quality and easier to maintain. So here you go. Thank you. I see you in part 2. So welcome to part 2 of this project management course. So during part 1, we saw how project management works. During part 2, we are defining a framework for you to really ace it as a project manager. So in order to do that, we'll bring in some new concepts that are not usually part of project management, but that would really make a difference in your project management style and the way you are seen by stakeholders. And we will also take some concepts that we have seen in part 1 and we will refine them. We will give them a twist. We will perfect them to put all the chances on your side. Welcome again to part 2 of this course. So we've done the introduction, part 1 the course. Now we are located here, a framework for acing it. As we've seen in the introduction, there's 3 major components: the context, the framework, and then interview tips. So let's have a look on a more granular level, if you like, the section overview. So we'll start off with the project management context. There's a framework made of 5 steps or 5 components, if you like: the expectation matrix, golden rules, the artifacts, the dangers, names and numbers to know from memory. We'll also have a bonus tip, which is a project log, which is not really strictly speaking part of the framework, but it's a very good tool. What to say at interviews, also we'll discuss that, and then we will finish by a review of what we have seen in part 2 and a wrap up. Welcome back to the course. So let's see if we can build on the knowledge of part 1 and not only be a decent project manager, but try and up our game a little bit. Let's try and ace it. Just I wanted to give you a bit of context initially. So obviously it's not easy to represent the context for all projects, but I'm trying to find, if you want, the most common type of structure that you could be working in if you are a project manager. So I've brought it up in more or less 4 categories: business, project office, manager, and the project team. Every group is considered a stakeholder of your project, and within each group, each stakeholder comes into your project with a different need. So this is the whole philosophy, if you like, of acing project management, is to attempt to meet their needs and also at the same time cover yourself. So let's have a look at the needs of each one of these groups, bearing in mind that each group has individuals that could have different needs. You could have 2 resources or 2 business stakeholders doing more or less the same job, but taking into account their personality or their history within the company, they would have different needs. That's something that is very important. They are not all the same. So when you get into a new job, it's very important to understand all those components here, or a new project for that matter. So if we start with the business, what do they want from a project manager? The business wants you to understand their business. So they don't want someone who's just gonna take the project, put it all into milestones and deliver that. It might appear this way or sometimes, but I tell you what, they really want you to be part of their team. They want to see you as one of their team, putting their project together and just delivering it. So if you understand the business strategy, the final outcome of the project, you will be able to communicate with the business. You will be able to share their excitement. You will be able to make suggestions. So they want to see you as part of their team and not just a specialized resource. So that's something that is important. Something else that they want from you is they want you to be flexible. They want, as I was saying, they want someone part of the team, so they want someone who's not going to come in a way of their quote-unquote dream of a project. They don't want someone to tell them, oh, sorry, you can do that with the process. As soon as they ask a small change, if you say, no, sorry, can do, I'm going to be in trouble with my boss, they don't want that. So this is why I have this principle that when a business asks for a change, any type of change, even if I know that in no way that can be implemented, I never say no straight away. I don't want to come across that way. I said, I will investigate, I will check. On first account, it seems a bit of a challenge, but I will get back to you on this one. So this is more or less the business. That's the 2 key things they want from you. Needless to say, they also want the project to be implemented on time and on budget because they're paying and they want the business benefits earlier. But those are more the common attributes of a project management and a project manager. So I'll leave those aside. I am more focusing here on the individual needs. Let's have a look at the project office. So sometimes it's not a project office, as mentioned. This is just one possible variation. But I'm just going to assume there is a project office. If it's not the project office that wants you to be compliant, because that's a need they have, compliance, it would be someone else. There is always someone out there that wants you to be compliant. You cannot implement change without going through change control. You need to have your issue register up to date. You need to go through A, B, C to get to D. You cannot jump to D directly. You need to have your report by that point in time. That's a project office for you. Then you have management. It could be a program manager, it could be your line manager, it could be anyone, someone that you report to, more or less. So what does he or she want from you? She wants you to be fast. She doesn't want you to, okay, do that whenever you're ready. Or the business came up with a proposal, take your time. They will always want you to be fast, to put summaries fast. On their side, they have a lot of pressure for a lot of managers. Maybe your project is competing with another project that should have gone there, so they want you to give them what they want very fast. Now you already see probably a bit of a challenge here without going any further. And I just want to highlight that quickly, if I can get this pen started, is that you have stakeholders here wants you to be flexible and compliant. It's not always compatible. And you have two stakeholders here who want you to have a bit of a conflicting information here. So we've seen in part one, the best way around this is to simplify. If you simplify, you are faster and you can be more flexible as well. So that's a part of the challenge, I suppose. Let's go back to the manager. I want you to be fast. What else? So the manager wants you to bring options, to add value. So this time it's not options about the business, understanding the business, but it's more on the technical side sometimes, or on the lateral thinking side. So the manager here, when you have an issue, he doesn't want someone who just reports the issue back to him. The adding value here component is key. There's an issue, I escalate. There's an issue, I escalate. There's an issue, I escalate. Without any options. That is not good. That doesn't meet his or her needs. I think this is the most important part of project management, I believe. What else? On top of that, thorough and accurate. You know, your budget is being scrutinized by a lot of parts of the, the business, project office, and your manager as well. But your manager really wants you to nail it first time. So you can see that if you have something that is simple, as we've seen in part one, it's easier to be accurate. And also to be very thorough. It's very important not to drop things off, especially during the planning phase, as we saw. So that's for your management team. Now you could say the project team, they quote-unquote work for you, but they are not to be neglected. I see project managers who choose their side from the beginning. They stick with the business and they do everything for them at the cost of the others. They stick to the manager, or they are a sticker to the rule, and they forget the other very important component. So I know it is not easy, but we try and meet all those needs. Otherwise, it's easy just to stick to one. Very easy. And the forgotten child, project team. So resources who come from this project team, they are often taken away from their usual daily tasks. So they are a bit, if you want, isolated sometimes. They can be also dedicated project resource and they're used to it. But regardless, as the management line between yourself and the project team is always dotted line, so they don't really directly work for you, or very rarely. In projectized project they would do that, but it doesn't occur that often. So they are a bit disconnected in a way. They have dotted line with you and they are still reporting to their functional manager somewhere, and they are a bit split between the two. So the functional manager might not really be that interested in the project. So they need support from you. You need to understand the challenge, their concerns. You need to be very supportive to your project team. And I tell you what, they will give that back to you. They also want you to be organized. I mean, we have a project manager. It's for one reason. It's to organize stuff around here. Okay, they might have worked together for a long time, but if there's a project manager, let's use him or her. So this is what they want from you. They want you to be supportive, although they might not always say it this way, but they also want you to be a top-notch project manager who will help them communicate with the other teams. Sometimes there's some history between the teams. So this is what they really want from you. So as you can see, not all environments are the same. Sometimes things can vary, but there's something that will not vary is you will be working with various groups who all have different needs. So that's an exercise evaluating their needs that you need to do on every project. Even if you work in the same company, you would definitely have a different business unless you are working with the same team, manager, project office, and business on the next project, then that doesn't need to be redone. So that's it for project management context. It's not just a matter of running around and doing your project, it's also a matter of building the relationship with these various teams, have them on your side. It's always much easier when you have teams on your side. I remember when I was working for IBM, actually, I was working on the client side, requiring the resources for this client side. The project team was on the client side, not from IBM, but I remember I had this discussion with one of the important team manager who was providing resources to project managers, and when I came to his desk, he was a bit upset with another project manager, and he admitted to me, when project managers act like this with me, I put their request at the bottom of the pile. That's a conversation that stayed with me for a long time, because this guy was honest enough to tell you that. So that's just another example that build relationship with all those teams, all those stakeholders. Welcome back to the course. Acing Project Management, Framework to Success. Now let's get straight into it. What is this framework about? So it's made of 5 components. Let's go through them one by one. I will show you a very useful tool that has served me very well. It's called the Project Manager Expectation Matrix. So that's something I've created. It is a matrix that you can put together to really round up all the stakeholders that you have to really try and understand it. And so that's building from the previous slides in a way. The second component of this framework is I will provide you with 4 golden rules to follow. There will be key rules that you always need to bear in mind. Some are stuff that you need to do as a one-off, but some are ongoing during the life of the project. I will tell you which 5 artifacts you need to have in perfect order to protect yourself from all potential requirements from any type of stakeholders. I will tell you about some dangers that you need to look out for. So that doesn't really necessarily mean that you need to take action, but once you know the type of challenges that you could potentially have, it makes it much easier to spot them and to react to them. And the last component, that's a very simple one. As part of this framework, there are 3 things that you need to know from memory. So this is the framework. Those are very concrete activity and things that you need to do if you really want to ace it, and we'll go through them one by one. Welcome back to the course. Let's get started with the first component of this framework, what I have called the project manager expectation matrix. What's your overall approach? The first thing we need to do is understand what all stakeholders expect from you. We saw that on the slides to open this part 2. They all want different things. They all have different needs. And it's dangerous to leave one need aside as a project manager. Number 2, give it to them. Give them what they need. Give them what they want, within reason, but give it to them. How do we do that? Perception and action. For perception or action as well. Doesn't have to be both. And the third step is to ask for feedback. This is something we never do. It's very rare that I see someone asking someone else in a work environment, how am I doing? So we've seen this, what stakeholders need. We give it to them through perception and action. So perception is sometimes we are doing a lot of work. I see sometimes project managers doing a lot of work, but they don't get much from it because they are not good at quote-unquote selling themselves. And it's a bit of a lose-lose situation because the project manager doesn't get the reward or the attention that he deserves or she deserves, and the manager or the business think that this project manager is not really pulling his weight or her weight because the project manager doesn't give the perception that he is doing a good job. He might be doing all the action, but if it's no one notices it, then the confidence is lost. I was giving in part 1 the example of reports, and why I think they are so important is that you could be doing the best job, you could be running around doing a lot of action, doing a lot of stuff, but you don't do your report. So you have your project office, you have your manager, you have the business. They judge you in a way through your report, and they think, oh, this guy never has his report on time. How many times do we have to tell him or her? The project team would think you're great because you've been doing all this running around, but the 3 other components, they don't. So this is why perception is very important. That makes everyone relax. And after we have this loop for feedback. Now let's see what this matrix looks like. So here it is. It is very simple in a way, but it's a bit of, it's not easy to do. It requires for you to do your investigation work. When you join a new company or you start a new project, you really need to get this from the stakeholders. And it's not always, you don't want to always go and ask them a question, you know, what are your needs? You cannot do that. So sometimes you have to do it by other means. So sometimes you just go and ask someone who has worked with him or her. You just have a feel at meetings or what the questions, what the concern he has without asking him or her directly. So this can be very subtle sometimes, because you don't want to go to everyone. Come on, everyone, what are your needs? But there are much more subtle way to get to that. So what does that look like? So the first one is we put here the stakeholder or the group of stakeholders. So it could be either a name or a group of stakeholders name. If you feel that there are 3 stakeholders working for the business, all at the same level, they seem very similar, and if they have the have the same personality as well, then you can put the group. But sometimes you would see that there are some that have different needs. So depending on that, you would have either the group of stakeholders or you would have an individual stakeholder. So this is the key. What does this group expect of me? Is this in contradiction with any other group's expectation? So this is what you will have to do. You might have to do some work, as we saw before. Can you be compliant and flexible at the same time? Can you be fast and compliant at the same time? So, and you would have to ensure that you meet the needs. You would have to find a bit of a middle ground on how to address those conflicting needs. So the expectation, the needs could have been another way to name this. And this is how you're going to address it. Perception. How can I cover this expectation to this group? Via perception. How can I cover that? What can I say? What can I show? What can I remind them of to make them feel comfortable about this expectation? We'll see some examples on the next slide. So it's not a clear action here. Is what can I do indirectly, if you like, so they can perceive that I am meeting their need. Action, that's more straightforward. What activity can I actually undertake to make them understand I am meeting their expectation? It can be something very concrete that you do. And feedback, check with stakeholder if you are doing okay. So this is a little bit like I mentioned about getting the expectation. It has to be a bit subtle sometimes. You cannot go directly and say, how am I doing? You know, you cannot do that every few weeks, but use your best judgment for this. You would feel it sometimes, but sometimes it's very difficult. You know, sometimes you work with someone for months, they seem to be a bit, you know, grumpy, they don't seem very happy, and one day you can't hold it anymore. You say, how am I doing? And you realize that you've been doing very well. So sometimes it's not very easy to read, but it's important to get this information. Is it a success? And if this is a success, then this matrix for the stakeholder, you can put that on hold because you know you are working on it. You know everything is going perfectly well. So on the next slide, we'll see some examples. So let's see what this expectation matrix could look like. So as a stakeholder, for instance, you could have the project office manager, Mary, and her expectation is process to be understood and followed. So what could I do for her to be confident that I'm keen and willing to follow the processes? And I'm not what we call a cowboy, which is a project manager who just goes straight to the end. No, it's not too concerned about processes. So one thing I could do, once again, depending on the environment you're in, but one thing I could do is I could ask her clarification on the complex process. So that would make her understand and realize that I've reviewed all the processes and I'm on board. I am keen to follow them as much as I can. And the action I could take, I will send reports on time. But I haven't gone yet to receive feedback. So I do not know yet if my strategy is working. So I need to keep an eye on my next meeting with her and all the project managers, how she views me. Next example, a team member, Eric. So he seems concerned his role is not valued. He's been in his role for a long time. He's been thrown from projects to projects to projects. And he doesn't show enthusiasm at meetings. And he just feels that his line manager, doesn't really value him. What could I do as a perception? So as a perception, I could remind the importance of his role at meetings. And not only to him, but feedback is always stronger when there are other team members. So I could ask him if he has any concerns with what's happening around his activity, so that will make him realize that I'm working with him, that I have a good idea of his work and I value his work. And an action, I really want to do something concrete for this person. I don't want to put the other team members as a disadvantage, but maybe I will do it just a little bit more with him. So when he does something good, I will send email to his manager copying him. They really appreciate that. Usually they always send me an email and say thanks for that, but what is very important here, only do that when they do something good. So there's a principle, catch them doing the right thing, and at this point highlight it to themselves and to the manager. This is how we build confidence. So we don't want to be repeating that every week, good work, good work, good work, when it's a bit empty. When I do something concrete that is good, remind them and remind the managers. I haven't gotten feedback yet, but I will soon see that during project meetings regarding his attitude, because his attitude was not very positive to start with. He's been dealing with a lot of project managers, so let's try and turn him around. So the business owner, Ronald M. So he expects me to understand how this project is important to the company. So he took me aside and really made me clearly understand that this project is very important for the next 3 years of this company. So this I didn't even have to check. It's not very subtle, but he wants me to understand the business impact, the business benefits of this project. So I really need to show him that I am on board and that I understand the business impact of this project. So what I've decided to take as a perception action is I will mention in the next meeting the potential requirement addition he mentioned. So he mentioned a requirement and he said that could be even better, and I just want to follow him up. I don't want to hide away from it. If it's going to come, let's face it now. And I think that will show good commitment. Project managers are often reticent, of course, and rightfully so, to any new change, but that could be a good opportunity for me to really show that I'm working with him. So I won't take any concrete action at this stage, but I will review next month. And the 21st of Feb seemed okay with my understanding of the business, so that already gathered some good feedback here. So now my manager, Jane. So she seems concerned I don't understand yet one technical aspect of the project. Sometimes manager really expect you to understand all the very technical side of projects. So when it's an IT project, something to do with a cloud, with technical, or if it's any type of project, there's always something very technical to understand about it. But I have the feeling that, yeah, that she doesn't fully trust me on that aspect because she's questioning me a bit too much on it. So I need to learn that technical aspect. Obviously not to the level of the project team. It's not my role, but I need to understand the high level stuff and the dependencies and what is required to fix issues around this technical aspect. So I will, by perception, I will ask her who is the best person to explain the technical component of the project. I will go front on and I will ask her, so I will not do anything yet, but at least I will ask her so she understands that I'm keen to understand it. And then I will learn it. So even if I don't do that immediately, at least I've done that and the wheels are in motion, that she knows that I'm on board, she knows that I'm committed, she knows that I want to learn. 22nd of Feb, I ask her what I should focus on. We'll check in a few weeks if I'm doing okay. So I've just asked for more feedback here, and she still refers to this, and I know I've perception is not enough. I need to go back to this, but I need to, if it mentions something else, I have something else to work on, but I will check again in a few weeks. So she has another expectation. She seems extremely focused on the budget. I mean, you could argue every manager, but here to an incredible extent that she's asked me to give her updates every week on the budget. So what I need to do is I will promptly mention any issue impacting the budget. So that's something we always have to do anyway, but in this case I will be really doing it on a almost on a daily basis if it occurs. So what I will do is I will not come to her after the event. I want to be proactive and I want to give her the option to help me so we don't have that budget problem. So in other words, she'll be involved as well. And if she cannot say you didn't fix it, she will have to say, well, we didn't fix it. So that's a bit of a difference, if you like. But I definitely gonna give her the perception that I'm really on top of budgets. And by action, I will provide regular, meticulous budget updates. My theory, you give them more than what they want. If they are really focusing on something, give them more than what they want. This way they will leave you alone. I haven't asked for feedback yet, but or haven't noticed anything that shows me that I'm on track, but I will definitely do it. So that's it. That's a very useful tool. Now obviously this is you know, the best case scenario when you would have this and you would update it and the likes. Sometimes you'll see that you can do that without actually maintaining this. Obviously you would have some type of notes or the likes, but it's very important to do it. I've done it with the project office, one project team member, business owner and manager, but you know, you would obviously have several, you know, you could have several groups, several names. Okay, so that's it for this first component of the framework. Welcome back to the course. Acing Project Management Framework. Now it's time to present the 4 golden rules. I will go into more detail for each one of them, but initially a quick overview here. First one, fit into whatever environment you are in. So it's following on to the previous component of the framework, the expectation matrix. Understand where you work. Second rule is understand the business and what they want from the project. So we've already also touched on that on expectation matrix, but we will put another layer of this on top here. Roles and responsibilities, rule number 3, extremely important. So you could ignore that rule and have a very good project, but you could ignore it and that could cause you some challenges on the project, let's put it this way. And finally, use meetings to get outcomes, not updates. We're focusing on team meetings, but I suppose the same would apply to steering committee type of meetings. Well, you really want to not only provide updates, but also try and get outcomes from the executive team. So that's it. Let's start with the first one, fit into whatever environment you are in. Let's continue with this course. Golden rule number 1. Fit into whatever environment you are in. So what does that mean? Understand the company culture initially, and then match it. So you could be a consultant working for a service provider and you are thrown into a client site and you think, well, I'm come from this service provider, we're doing this way, forget about the company culture, but you'll be wrong. You need to match it. Otherwise you'll be standing out, and that's not good for yourself, and that's not good for your hiring company as well. If you are employed in a new company, you also need to understand and match the culture. You need to blend in initially. This is the role of the project manager. That doesn't mean you don't have any personality, that will come. But as far as culture, you don't want to stand out to start with. And also what you do is you need to understand if the environment leans towards being process driven or result driven. So it's not clear cut, it's not 0% on one side and 100% on the other side. So it's a blend. That's why I put lean towards. Usually small service provider or service provider in general, they don't really have as a stringent process. They are more, they have a bottom line. They want the client to be happy and to get things done. But on the other hand, working for government, banks and the likes, they are more process driven. They have a lot of audits. They want to make sure that you tick all the boxes. I was working for a very large government agency in Australia, and the project office really didn't care if the project was late, as long as all the boxes were ticked. So you need to know which process absolutely needs to be followed and those that don't need to be followed. So part of establishing if the environment needs to one being process driven or result driven, you would have a look at which component of processes really are mandatory and are strictly followed in this company. So they could give you a huge process documentation that you spend the first week reviewing, but in the end of the day and in real life, not all of them are really mandatory. So that would save you a lot of time, so you can navigate your way through only the mandatory processes. So bottom line is give the compliance people what they want. During interviews, they often want to suss you out and ask you, what is your style and the like. So they have a culture and they want your answer to match their culture. So it's very important, even before you start working for a company, to understand this. I had interviewers at interview, just telling me they are result driven. So they already put their cards on the table during the interview. So to summarize all this, don't rush into doing things your way. Take some time in the first maybe couple of weeks to really understand how things work. And bottom line is be as pragmatic as possible while following mandatory rules and processes. Because if you are pragmatic, you have more time to work on results. But at the same time, processes that have to be done have to be done. Welcome back. Golden rule number 2. Understand the business and what they want from the project. And what do they want from the project? They want benefit realization. What they are working on, they want to see the benefits at the end of the project. So sometimes they are not the most riveting benefits. It could be just a mandatory legal change, but at least they will be compliant and it's important for them. It could be a new product, and then that will be more obvious that the benefit is important for them. So I have included this in a project management process because we should always keep that in mind. In planning, keep it in mind. Execution, in closing, keep it in mind. Understand the business model and the industry. That will be so useful for you. Seems like a lot of work, but also that makes your role a bit more interesting, gives it more variety. Let's say you work on a project who has a look at one business component, and you hear about another project that the company is running, that's doing something a little bit similar, and you understand the dependencies and the likes, and you start bringing that in. Now the business, I think, would like that you actually understand the dependencies between components from a business point of view. So talk to the business in business words, not project words. Don't mention deadlines, registers, product management processes, constraints. Talk to them using their own words. We mentioned earlier, the business want to see you as part of their team. They don't want to see you as someone doing something technical that doesn't really interact with their team. If you understand the business and if you talk to them in business words, then you're on the right track. So see your project's objective as delivering business benefit. That's the same thing, not following process and meeting deadlines. So if you deliver on time and on budget, but the benefits are not really evident, are not really there for the business because you didn't do something during planning and execution that would have made things better as far as benefit realization, then I don't think you've achieved your goal. Remember, the business area is paying to get this work done. So work with them, be part of their team, and understand what they want. Welcome back to the course. Golden rule number 3, clear roles and responsibilities. So that seems to be an easy one. On the project, everybody know what they're doing, but it is not that obvious. So when you start a project, and sometimes it's not evident when you start it, is as you progress on a project, it's very important to find out all the areas where the responsibility is not clear. And when there's no one responsible for something, it falls back on the project manager. And that is not good because the project manager is not a technical resource. The project manager is a coordinator. So areas that don't have a clear responsibility will definitely negatively impact the project. So you need to check the responsibility for project activities and also all issues. Let's say you take over a project, there's a huge issue register, and most of the issues don't have owners. So you're already, right from the start, you have a lot of work to do to allocate each one of those. Until they're clearly allocated, they're not going to solve themselves. Another thing to bear in mind is, be mindful of, is a resource doing the work that he or she is not supposed to do. So that seems like very helpful on the short term. But, say the project comes under pressure, so that person doesn't want to do that anymore and you're left with a gap. Or further down the track, the thing was not done properly and he or she tells you, well, look, I've done that just goodness of my heart. I'm not really an expert. So that's just an example, but I think it shows that it's critical that everybody needs to know what they're doing. And I think it's all downhill when everybody knows what they're doing. But this doesn't only work for your project team. It's also very important as a project manager, for instance, that you know where are your limits. If you make decisions on the spot with your project team, and then they are being overruled by your manager or by their managers for that matter. So it's very important to know what you can and cannot do without getting prior approvals. So you have to put, cards on the table and say, okay, where are my limits? Where are my authorities? And also, where is my ultimate responsibility? Because it's not always the same depending on where you work. To finish, also approvals. So you could be working on a project, about to implement, about to reach a milestone, and after, when you look for sign-offs, everybody looks the other way. So it's really important, and we had that in a project charter or the PMP, the sign-off list if you can, because otherwise it's going to be extremely difficult, and then you could waste time because someone is going to be brought in as a last minute, as a sign-off, and guess what? They'll be reviewing all the documentation. And the chances increase that they're not going to be happy with it, so you might have to take a step back. Another one on the approval side is team members. So sometimes you think that you have all the authority in a room when you chair a project team meeting, but after you realize that each one of the team members reports to another entity. Like for instance, a technical expert might have designed his own stuff, technical stuff, and when you think, well, it's ready soon, he said yes, but I need to go through this review, and it's another technical committee who needs to review and the like. So that happens so much, especially in government and a very large company where you cannot just have a project doing his own stuff regardless of what's happening on the broader scale of the company. Governance checks as well is important, making sure when something happens it doesn't need to be double checked, triple checked by other entities, because they are actually stakeholders. If your document is being reviewed by a couple of other persons, so these persons become part of the project in my book, because they have the quote-unquote power to slow down the project. So be aware of that, especially when you have to make a decision on the project as a group. Make sure that everyone that is making a decision is known to you. You might not be able to bring them all in the room, but technical groups, government checks, functional managers, make sure that they are all clearly articulated, and so that you know that you need to get this final tick before you can make that decision. So to finish on the golden rule 3, roles and responsibilities, just quickly, a reminder, areas without clear responsibility will negatively impact the project, and be mindful of what we've seen, assumptions, is nobody is doing a task because they assume the project manager will do it or a team member will do it. Be mindful of outsourced project, and this is where the roles and responsibilities start to get a bit blurred, because is it the service provider to do this, or is it the company to do this, the hiring company to do this? Between a manager and a team member, we've seen that. Be mindful of shared responsibility. When there's no one really responsible, it's more a team responsibility and the like. So who is making the final call? Clear delegation. How much money can I spend? Or this person designing this stuff or writing this document, do they really have the delegation to do it, or do they have someone above them to sign it off? So that's it. So that completes golden rule number 3. Welcome back to Acing Project Management golden rule number 4. Use team meetings to get outcomes, not updates. So in part 1, we've gone through the theory of meetings, which is meetings seen, for the project manager to coordinate tasks and get updates, go around a table, and then you go back to your desk and you just put all that in a schedule, and you're good to go. Now, I will be proposing we run meetings differently. It's a unique opportunity for you, when you have all the team members together, to solve some issue and to really get things moving. There's a very strong focus for me on issue resolution. You want to keep control on the issue resolution process. So in order to do this, there's a few things we need to do first. We prefer individual updates done outside the meeting. So you have Mary working on the task, but if it's an independent task that she doesn't rely on anyone, so you can get that update yourself outside the meeting. So one-on-one update, it's easier to challenge. You don't want to challenge Mary in front of everyone, right? If there's something a bit dodgy, if it takes longer than thought. So it's easier, it's less confrontational, and it's better also for team morale, I believe. The second one that's a key one, and that's the whole idea of getting outcomes, is you give more time and more focus on a group discussion in meetings. And this is what we'll try and achieve during these meetings to really get things done. So, and the advantage also to have individual updates outside the meeting is you build a relationship and you're being kept up to date on a ad hoc basis. So there are activities that take 3 months. Do you need to bring that person to meeting every week? If there is no dependency on others, probably not. So you could go to her desk and you discuss with her and you get a good feel and the likes, and you bring her back to the meetings when she's needed, unless she wants to participate, of course. So before the meeting, what we do? We put together the list of outcomes that we need, and you ensure attendance. Ensure attendance of the key resource that you need to solve your issues or to get outcomes or to get things moving. Meetings are, too often focusing on action items. You go around the table with all the action items, and you also go around the table to get updates, as I was mentioning. So, you're halfway through the meeting and you're still going through the action items, and usually they are one-on-one conversation, and this is what I want to avoid during my meetings. This is my opportunity, sometimes just your only opportunity during the week where I have all the team involved. So do I want to waste that to have one-on-ones during this meeting when I can do it outside the meeting? Nope. So what do we do? Letting go of the need to control the meeting, and that's a big one. Of course, it's not as black and white as that, but I will explain why I sometimes let go of the need to control the meeting. I know you're being told project managers need to control the meeting, and sometimes you have to, but other times you need to let it get out of control. Let's have a look. So during the meeting, you focus on issue resolution. You have to fix issues on the spot if you can. So let's take the scenario: 2 resources are required to fix an issue. You have the choice. They both attend because you have checked your attendance and you have checked your outcomes and you know this issue needs to be fixed. They both attend the meeting. They both start discussing a resolution for that issue. So what do? You have other team members start looking at you and say, not using those words, but say, Ben, this is getting out of control. I let it happen because I have the choice. Either I just say, okay guys, take this one offline, and then I lose the control, or I ask them, yes, that's good, keep going, I like it. They could reach a resolution within 10 to 15 minutes, but if I send them back to their desks, it might take 2 days for them to get back together. I mean, that's why we need project managers, because team members are not that organized, and it's not their role either. So usually if you leave it to them, you are not sure to have a quick outcome. Something else that you can do during the meeting is start a brainstorming session. There's a whiteboard, let's brainstorming. Okay, so you might have a look from a team member who clearly knows now that the meeting is getting out of control, but you know, I don't care because my outcome is being worked on and I will get my outcome. This is good. This is good stuff. If I want updates, I can get them outside the meeting. This is good stuff. Say another scenario is you have a resource who tells you, well, I need to talk to that person. I just need to have a yes or no from that person, and then I will get back to you, and then we can meet again and the likes. No, call that person straight away. Don't hesitate to do this type of stuff in meetings, and you will see huge progress with this. So something else you can do is focusing on issue detection. So you will hear words like there is a slight delay with this, nothing to worry about, or I'm facing minor issues with this. What I recommend is you dig them out and you really assess their impact right now. Because a slight delay could turn up to be a very large delay or very concrete delay. And sometimes resources just don't really want people getting involved. Their issues, they want to fix it. They don't want to have to explain it to someone else and go through all that process. But it's in your interest to pick that up and then fix it before it gets out of control. So I've mentioned that. So it's okay to let the meeting go off track if needed. And brainstorming is okay. I have no issues with brainstorm during meetings. So the last part on meetings is meetings are your golden opportunity to motivate the team and really influence the project. So what you do is you open and you finish on a high. I think it is always good. Try and catch them doing right. It's like if there is something good that happened during the week, open the meeting with this. Open the meeting with something positive, a good outcome, an issue resolved, a good progress made during the week. Say, well done, guys. I was really impressed. It's completed, and the like. That's a good start of the meeting. You often have resources coming to the meeting. I ask them, how are you today? And they say, well, I'll be better if I didn't have to come to these meetings. Oh, it happens. So if you give them something at the meeting, I think next time they'll be a bit more motivated. So praise them often, and the managers as well. You know, explain a little bit to catch them doing right. So make sure you do it when actually something was done right. Something else to motivate the team and not being seen as a slave driver, if you like, is do not only interact with them when you need something from them. You don't want a team member when they see you coming say, uh-oh, here's Ben, he's going to ask me for an update. You just come and you don't talk about the project at all. You talk about anything, sports, weather, have a good day. So this way they don't associate you as someone who just needs him or her for updates. So to finish on project meetings, I really think that projects are won during project meetings. They are not very popular. Nobody really wants to turn up. You don't really want to organize them. But this is where you really get the chance to make a difference in a project. This is really where you need to be super organized. You know, everybody's busy, so if you come with something half-baked and then like, be super organized. Spend as much time as you like to prepare this meeting. Read all your notes. go for it. It is your opportunity. Projects are won during meetings, in my view. So that's it for golden rule number 4. Motivate and influence. Welcome back to the course, Acing Project Management Framework. So now I will be presenting 5 artifacts to always have in perfect order, or at least have in very good order. So, you know, personally, if I worked on a project and I knew there would be never any audits, or there's no project office, or no one would ever look in my project folder, there's plenty of artifacts that I wouldn't even create. Like, for instance, the issue register for me is not very useful, because I would have my own list. I would have that in my notes with, you know, issues and who is resolving those and the likes. But when you work on a project, you don't do stuff for you in the end of the day. You don't do all the admin paperwork for yourself. You do it more for perception for the others. So this is why I will list you those, and I will give you after the reason why. I will go into a little bit more detail on each one of the artifacts, and I would tell you why. I believe they need to be kept in good order. So the first one is the registers. So the risk and issue registers need to be up to date. The reports need to be in perfect order. I think that should occur automatically, but they are perfect order for reports. They need to be very precise on the budget, on the time frames, and where we are at with the key milestones. The budget, very good order too, key numbers and how we are tracking. The schedule, of course, the key milestone and the near term, and the approvals. Are we okay to do this? Did we get a big tick? Are we okay to progress? Are we okay to do what we are doing now? Did we get the approval to get here? So if you could get this 5, okay, 6, because there's 2 here, but if you could get these 5 artifacts in very good order, you are protecting yourself from any types of audit, internal or external, from the project office reviews, from someone taking over your project and thinking that, you know, you haven't followed the processes and the project is a mess. Anyone coming to you requesting some information, you can say, yes, I have this information, it's up to date and it's located there. So project register, it's for perception. Anyone has heard of issue registers? And it's a very frequently asked question. Do you have that in your issue register? Everyone can relax once they know it's logged there. It's crazy, but that's the way it works. Reports, it's really always for perception. That make you look good if you give them on time and they are of good quality. The budget also for perception. The schedule for perception. Approvals for insurance, so you can cover yourself, even if it's just an email from someone. We will review that in a little bit more detail in the next slide, and for audit as well, and we will see that in the next slide. So let's review those key artifacts and the reasoning behind them needing to be in very good order. Let's start with the registers. So that's a typical. During a project, you would have someone, project office manager, a stakeholder, concerned about an issue or the likes, and they would say, can I have a look at your issue register? So if you say, well, I don't have it yet, I haven't updated it yet, I have it on my list, I know I have to do it, but the problem is they don't know that you know. So if they, for them to look at the register, they would give them the confidence that you know. So also that doubles up with the fact that it's a key governance artifact. So project office, even if they're not interested in your issues or in your risk, knowing that you have this up to date, that will make them relax. So they would be interested to see if you have yours up to date. We've said that already. Make sure there's an order for them. It doesn't take a lot of time. You could negotiate and have only the key issues in there. So it's up to you to use your common sense, and when someone, a stakeholder, say, well, you should put them all, then use your common sense and say, well, the overhead is just too high. I've decided not to put this in the issue register. Reports. So this is how you are being perceived as a project manager. Sometimes you send your report to people who have never met you before. They don't even know you. So they will be, quote unquote, judging you through your report. So if you send a report with a budget that is not accurate or with a time frame that hasn't been updated, it's not going to look good. So protect yourself, have it in perfect order, and also send it on time. So we've already discussed that. Welcome back. Let's continue with the key artifact number 3, which is budget. So budget maintenance is, in my view, your opportunity to shine as a project manager. There's nothing like a PM who has his spreadsheet and knows exactly where we're at with the budget. And this is very important because stakeholders, obviously, the business, your managers, they see that as a critical component of the project, and they want to know if the project manager is on top of this. So anyone coming to your desk, say, where we at with the budget, you should be able, without hesitation, to say, yes, I have it there in my spreadsheet. If the company has a central way to track budget, put it in there as well. But sometimes they are a bit clunky and they are only updated every month. So go beyond and have your own way to track your budget at a more granular level. And the actuals need to be up to date. You need to know the timesheets from last week need to be included in there. This really needs to be in perfect order. You might not get the call that often, but when you get the call for budget, it has to be almost instant and in very good order. And you'll see they would love you for this, because the more senior the stakeholders are and the more they are interested in budget numbers. As you go up the company, they look more at numbers, and if the project is implemented 1, 2, 3 months later, it's not as critical for them. They're really interested in the bottom line. So budget, big tick. Schedule, of course. So the schedule, the thing is, the schedule is, I said budget, not everybody is interested, but schedule, every level of the project is interested in the upcoming dates. And they want a good level of confidence that you are on top of things, that you are coordinating the tasks and the likes. Have a schedule tailored for each stakeholder levels. A detail for the project team, so it doesn't need to be an MS project for the project team. But for management steering committee, they, as I was mentioning in part 1, they like the idea that you have a MS project somewhere, a Gantt chart somewhere. That makes them feel confident. And I could have put the project office also in this category. Project office usually would want you to have a Gantt chart somewhere, but keep it up to date. Even if you know what's going on, it needs to be up to date. There's nothing worse like someone having a look at your schedule and notices some tasks that are completed that are not put on 100%, or someone coming to you and say, well, we are very late on this, when in fact we are not, but it's just that the schedule is not, you know, up to date. So we talked about simplification in part 1. Simplify it, put your Gantt chart in this, and for this do whatever you like, but the project team needs to have some way to know where we are with the smaller tasks, and for the larger tasks, MS Project, to make everyone happy. Last artifact, approvals. We talked about gates, that, in the last slide of part 1, or one of the last slides, that, to go from one phase to the other, or to get anything done really formally, you need to have some type of approvals. That is important to have, early in the project, your approval list, so there's no confusion as you move on, who should be signing off and what. You need to keep track of these approvals. Depending on where you work, it will be very formal, but sometimes it will be just an email. And sometimes it will be just someone saying it to you, which is a bit of a problem sometimes. So I think when someone says it to you, if it's during a meeting, you send minutes of the meeting, and you confirm that. And you say, please everyone review, and if you disagree, just let me know. But that's a formal way. So if you, during the meeting, you ask, are we okay to implement this on Saturday? And someone say, yeah, fine. So either you ask them to send you an email, which they might not do, but or else you put that in the minutes, and then you use that as a formal approval. But sometimes, implementation, it seems very obvious, but sometimes it's a decision that is being made during the meeting, so an approval to do something differently. And I would do that during the minutes of the meeting as well. It's easier. But what if it's one-on-one? This is the scenario I just mentioned, which is one-on-one, and you're being told on one-on-one, yes, it's fine, let's do that. So that's, I think, sometimes it's done unintentionally, but sometimes it's done intentionally. So be careful with those, and try and get emails, and not try, but get emails. It is important to protect you as a PM. As we saw, these artifacts are just to make everyone happy, but also to protect you, some type of insurance. Cover yourself. So to wrap up on those, so it seems maybe a bit of hard work, but it doesn't take you long, and it's something you need to do anyway as a project manager. And that narrows it down to the type of things that really need to be up to date. So there's a lot of other stuff that you need to do as project manager, but I would focus on those first. So I don't know, it would take you how long to do this? Let's say registers not that long. If you limit yourself to the key risk and the key issues, maybe 30 minutes per week. Reports, spend some time. Sometimes there's some wording, especially if there's, you would have weeks where you would have to do the monthly and the steering, so obviously longer, but maybe 30 minutes there, 2 hours there, budget maybe 2 hours. Schedule, it's you managing the project is around managing schedules, so that's something you have to do anyway, so maybe 3 hours, and approval doesn't really take long. So that would take you how much? 5, 7, maybe 8 hours per week. So that gives you 4 days to do all the other stuff, and you have a very solid base here. So that's it for artifacts. Welcome to another part of this Acing Project Management framework. Now, I don't want to scare you off, but there are just some dangers that you need to be aware of. And what I mean danger is something that could impact you as the project manager, and therefore the project as well. So where do you stand? So you stand here, say. Let's see what could come in your way. So we talked about the project office. There are companies that have on top of project office some audits. It could be an internal audit. It's very large companies say they want to make sure you manage the project properly, so especially if you're a contractor. But regardless, they would check your stuff. And the 5 artifacts that I've listed before, if you're on top of that, you should be okay. I say should, because you need to have a closer look at previous audits. So ask your project office or your manager, do you get internal audits here, and what are they looking for? Because they could be looking for something different. But if you do the 5 artifacts, you should be in very good shape, in my view. External. So external, you have your company on your side with this. So it's not internal with the company checking on themselves, make sure every team member. So, but it's more external is more looking at the overall company. So they're a bit tricky because you could meet with them and you answer all the questions and you think everything's fine. And after you get their reports and you realize that there are things that you were not even aware that would be part of the quality check. So it's also very important to ask, do you get external audits and what type of things do they want? So for those two, the strategy, if you like, is to check with other project managers, project office, or even manager or anyone, do you get those and what do they want from you? Now that seems a little bit cheeky, but I suppose PMO, project office, project management office, and management, they will also keep an eye on your governance. And sometimes when things get tough, they are looking for, how can I put that politically correct way? They are looking for points of failure. So if you get everything in order, the 5 artifacts and all the roles and responsibilities and the like, you should be covered, but keep an eye on this. As for audits, obviously you cannot really ask them, but ask maybe peers, colleagues and the likes, what have they done in the past against project managers that could put you in trouble as a project manager? Check. Project resources. Now, they don't always do that purposely, but be careful that they don't want to shift the responsibility to you. I mean, just give you maybe a very obvious example is, I've had, test managers are supposed to test a product and give me a sign off and say, yes, I'm happy with the product. But I've had a test manager asking me, are you happy with what we've done? Are you happy with the product? It is not my responsibility. My responsibility is, yes, maybe to check that they have followed their own process and they have followed the quality management plan, but it is not my responsibility. So obviously this is just one example that, when there's a white space on the project and when there's an area that nobody is really taking care of, they expect the project manager to do it, but that could put you in trouble. So that's the first thing to be mindful. Ask yourself, is there anything that my team is expecting me to do? Or it could be anyone. It could be also, the business might think that you have the responsibility to do something when you just simply don't. So ask yourself this question. The other thing is management or your manager might want you to fix existing resourcing issues. So I've had that a lot of time. You are not a resource manager. So as a project manager, and all the project management standards would tell you that, as a project manager, you are responsible for delivering a project. And when there is a resource that you're not happy with, you need to raise that as an issue. You need to say, I'm not happy with that resource. You do not have to fix, quote unquote, this performance issue from a resource. And I've had that many times. Managers were coming to me and say, Ben, what are you doing to fix that resource? And I saying, this is not part of my role. I am not there to fix this resource. I'm here to alert you when a resource is not suitable for the project. But I am not going to fix your HR issues. So I've had to do that several times, and it's something that sometimes the resource managers just don't understand, that you are not a resource manager. They are. And they see opportunity for you to fix the issue. But they have processes to do that. And I don't have the power as a contractor or as a dotted line project manager to do this. Stakeholders. So this is probably focusing more on the business side. Although you could argue that, project resource management, even, project office maybe, could fall into that category, but, misinformed, they are not fully aware of what's going on, so they could come to you and ask you stuff so they can get better informed, but is that really your role? And why are they misinformed? Have they put left aside? You could have some internal disagreement, especially on the business side. Some could be against the project, or they could have a completely different philosophy on the company strategy, or they could simply also be latecomers. They're coming late in the project, and that's I've seen that so many times especially when a resource leaves. The business owner leaves, another business owner comes, and okay, what are we doing here? And they want to review absolutely everything. So that needs to be raised, and that needs to be addressed. That needs to be discussed with the whole project. So you don't want to be, as a project manager, to be left with dealing with this issue. If there's a latecomer and they have a lot of influence on the project, everything needs to be put back on the table formally, not by side discussions. Legacy issues. So those are existing issues that the company has, internal workings that are not performing. I'm not talking about resource issues here, I'm just talking about processes, about things that are not working well, maybe a lack of quality somewhere. And as a project manager, is it really your role to fix those? So things were never working to start with, now they have a project working in this area. Is it really your role to fix those on the long term? So that's it. So it's more awareness for this danger here, for this step of the framework here. So what do? You need to acknowledge them, be aware of them. You could have a strategy for each, especially for the audits. Okay, I know that there is an internal audit done every 6 months. It's coming in a couple of months and I need to be ready now. So, and the strategy can be in function of the existing company, of the individuals, and the governance model in place. And this is where I suppose where you have to be very, very tactful and very subtle in the way you address those. But please bear those in mind. Welcome to the final part of the Acing Project Management framework. 3 things to know from memory. So this part here is more to make you look good, which means in project management term, people would trust you. You will come across as professional. People will have confidence that you're on top of things. But more from, if you want, high-level stakeholders, or from executives, steering committee and above. So having said that, there is really something that you need to know is all the key stakeholders' names, especially on the business side. So imagine this scenario where you're working with your manager, he introduces you to a stakeholder, and you don't know him or her, when in fact you should, because he or she is a key stakeholder and you should have that in your paperwork. So if you say, hi, nice to meet you, and what is your role, you ask, that wouldn't be very good. That would be like you don't really know who's who, and you don't really know who's involved in your project. On the other hand, if you say, oh, Mary J, yes, so you are the senior executive in this, and we are working very hard on your project, you know that. So something along those lines to show that you are on top of things. So it is not a long list, but please do it. You will really thank me for it when you come across in one of those scenarios, or if you're sitting at a meeting and someone is being introduced that you should know but you don't. To a certain extent, even sometimes in some scenario, you would need to know, even if they're not directly involved in the project, if they know, if they are just part of a management team, or even the business owner, manager, and the likes. It's always very good, and you will come across as very professional if you do. Same for the next one. The next one is a budget. So I'm not asking you here to know all the budget figures, just the key one. Just two numbers at this stage, if you like, if you're really a minimalist and you want to simplify. The project budget, which is the overall budget at completion, and the current spend. So this is also very good for perception. You have a senior executive, you have a steering committee member, a lift conversation, or even your finance manager, lift conversation. How are things with your project budget? Well, I would need to check my spreadsheet. I'm not really sure. I think we're okay. But if you say, well, the budget was 12.5 million and we are now at 6.3, and we are tracking well. So they would say immediately, this guy is on top of things. This guy knows what he's talking about. So this is not a big impost on you. You might know this one anyway, but if you know the current spend, if you want to be, a bit more detailed, you can know some more, so you can know a little bit more granular in, yeah, we have 12.5 for overall, and the 6 million for procurement. Looks like we're gonna meet no problem, but the 3 million for something else, we are a little bit behind, but we should be fine by the end of the project. If you want to be a bit more granular, but once again, the more information that you provide, the more you open yourself to being inaccurate. And the last one, milestones. You might have guessed that already, but same scenario. You see someone from the business, even if they are not involved in the project, and if they ask you when will this be going live, and you said, well, somewhere around April, it doesn't look good. So what I have here, you should know 2 or 3 key milestones and 1 or 2 near dates. Someone asks you, so where are we at with this project? And say, well, we're implementing the 12th of November. We start testing the 1st of September. But in the coming week, we'll be doing A, B, C. Once again, you look good. You are a project manager who is on top of his or her dates. You're the project manager who knows about the budget, who knows the team, the business team, not only the team he's working with, John, Mary, and Paul, but also, who has an interest in the broader company, who knows also the key high-level stakeholders are. So learn those, and after, go to meetings, go to the water cooler or anything, and you're ready to answer any key questions and to show that you're on top of your project. Welcome back to the course. So as a bonus, not part of the framework, I thought I'll throw in, a tip. The tip is to create a project log. So I'd like to put that to your consideration. A project log is a type of log where you keep a precise account of what's happened on a daily basis practically. When I say precise, is precise in a way that the information in there needs to be accurate, but you don't have to log things that are not really important to the project. So this is not, in my view, a formal project document. It's more for myself, although I believe some project management standards see that as a formal project document. But something that you just write on your own, I think, cannot be seen as something really, really formal. It's more your notes. Let's go quickly why I think this is a useful exercise. On very active projects, or if you manage several projects, that'll be very valuable. So you remember it after the meeting or after the phone call or on a day, but at the end of the week or the week after, you can't really exactly remember because that was not included in the minutes or in a report or the likes. So to increase, if you want, its validity or its credibility, just put it on a shared drive and say, guys, for your information, I'm putting a project log here if you want, so that you might not want to do this because you might want to keep this information here more personal, but it's up to you. So this is definitely not a substitute for any project management artifacts. But you can use to fill the gap when other documents are available to host the data. Sometimes you just don't have anywhere on your project management artifacts to say stuff like, Jen was sick that day, or that there will be, free resource performing testing from, although this is a type of things I would have in my minutes somewhere, but sometimes there are just no other artifacts. So jog your memory, as mentioned. Sometimes there is just a phone call, and maybe during, if you can, or after, just writing down, even if you put it somewhere else after, but sometime you'll be, on very active, or if you manage 3 or 4 projects, you'll be saying, oh, I can't even remember what we agreed on. So you could, as a final resort, I suppose you could still use it as evidence, so that would be in extreme cases. But in situation when, you might have put something in the minutes, and but still, the resource, for instance, here, business investigator will be free resource performing testing from the 10th of Jan, and something eluded them, so you can take your notes and say, well, that was discussed the 12th of December, we agreed on that, and this is why in the following meeting I put it in my minutes, so you can provide a bit more evidence on this. So obviously, use best judgment on this one. So that was for just a bonus tip. I'll leave it to you if you want to create a project log or not. Welcome back to the course. So in part 1, we've seen the theory of project management, how we can simplify it, and the practical tips. Part 2, we are seeing now how to really up our game and become what I believe is a very good project manager. And now, whether you're already in a job, whether you just have some interest at the moment in project management, or whether you just want to transition into project management, I thought I'll give you some interview tips. Even if you're already a project manager, I think there's always other opportunities. So I found that in project management, there's a lot of turnover. So you will be bound to go for interviews quite regularly. So I just really wanted to start with some interview tips. Let's get started. Let's see. First, let's have an overview of the questions. So those are questions that I believe are quite important and I'll be often asked as a project manager. I've often been asked those. So what is your main weakness? What is your strength? How do you deal with scope creep? Are you hands-on? What type of PM are you? And the question for you is, do you have any concern with my resume or my profile? So if we get started with the first question, what is your main weakness? So the main weakness, I suppose it's always a tricky one. You obviously it's not only a question that is being asked for project managers. So I think the interview book will tell you you have to mention a weakness that you are actually working on. So an old weakness and now you're working on and you don't have it as much and you are aware of it. So I think that can satisfy them. What I prefer to do with project management is actually give them a weakness that is not a weakness. I'm gonna be a bit cheeky and I'm gonna say, yes, I have this weakness, and in fact something that they would like. So you could say, I'm a bit too thorough sometimes. I'm a control freak because some interviewers would like that from a PM. So let's go through the bullet points. So mention a weakness that is useful in project management. So this answer will always satisfy the interviewer for me. This is what I was saying. So is my weakness is sometimes I'm not patient enough with the team. When there are tight deadlines, I tend to follow up quite often with them to ensure we keep on track. So you are saying, oh yes, I'm not patient. Of course, you have to wrap that up by saying, I like to work with the team. I give them positive feedback so they know that you're not going to be hated by the team. But I think this one always works for me because you say that you are not patient enough with the team and you use the keywords to keep on track. So if they hire you, they want you to deliver projects on track. They might have project managers that were not quote unquote strong enough with the team and the likes. So I think this always seems to satisfy them, and I see them writing, putting a bit of a tick on their notebooks when I tell them that. Another one is, what is your strength? The thing is with strength is it depends really on where you are interviewing. So if the ads, for instance, tell you they're looking for a project manager who is autonomous and self-driven, then you have as a strength you have to put that I can work with little supervision and I report by exception only. You have to demonstrate that. But another ad could say the opposite. It could say, oh, we want a team player because there's a pool of project managers and there's a lot of interaction between them. So in other words, pick a strength that will be useful for the job that you are applying for. Look at the job description for clues. Failing that, if you want more, if you didn't manage to get a feel of what they are, you have to remember the key attributes. The basic attributes for project managers is planning and communication. So your answer should be around that. They don't want someone who cannot plan and who's terrible at communicating. So your answer should be around those two. But also, they hire you, usually, to deliver projects on time and on budget. So if you could mix these four things into one sentence, or just pick 2 out of the 4, so I think that there'll be a good standard blanket response if you like. So try this. I have been told that I'm good at planning and at ensuring activities are completed on time. So you say planning on time. I have also received good feedback on my communication skills within project team, but also steering committee. So if you complete on time, you could imply that you will be on budget as well, or if you feel that they are more into the budget side of things, just you can say completed within budget allocated and the likes. So this question is sure to come up. So it's not always worded this way. Sometimes it's worded a little bit differently. Like could be, what do you do when a business comes to you with an additional requirement? How do you control the scope of your project? How do you make sure you don't over-deliver and therefore the time frames or the budget are impacted? So I've been asked this question very often. So the key word should be change control. Or you could say change request. I ask the business to raise a change request. I've noticed sometimes I can say a lot of words, but as soon as they hear change control, they relax and they write that down and they seem to be happy with the answer. So scope management is critical for projects to be delivered on time and on budget. When a new requirement is presented to the project, budget and schedule impact need to be assessed and a change request raised for the steering committee to approve. So you could be tempted at this stage to say things like, well, if the change is small, I might be able to slip it in. I like to be flexible and the likes. You know, that could work if you are being interviewed by the business. But I think it's a bit of a high risk. Why risk it? So I think it might look good in some circumstances, but I think it's a bit high risk. So I would, during the interview, I would really keep it safe. So to compensate, if you want, for not saying that, you could stress a lot of your flexibility component, so they don't see you just as a bit too strict, if you like, and someone who could scare the business. So if you mix that up with a little bit of flexibility side, so I think that could work. But yeah, I would definitely use the safest, use change control, use change request. This way, you know, they feel more relaxed. Well, they could be asking you the question because the previous project managers have let the project go out of control as far as scope is concerned. So they've been thrown additional requirements and they've been including additional requirements to the project. Or if they ask you this question, it's because they know that the business are very volatile requirements, and they often come with projects, and after they want to change it and the likes, and they're a bit concerned, and they're hiring a project manager to make sure that this doesn't happen. Let's continue on how to answer interview questions for project management jobs. So next one is also a little bit tricky like the previous one. Are you hands-on? So I've been caught once with this one. See, the challenge, if you are hands-on, you're working with the project team. And you are more or less the manager, and definitely the project office and manager might pay the price for your over-involvement in that area. The business might be happy for you to work with the project team because that would, you know, assist the project. But I think it's a bit tricky, and I have found that this is usually asked by, you know, contractors. They are not working for the company full time, so they are also contractors, and they want to know, you know, if you are a type of PM will be able to help them if there's any, you know, problems, or if you're going to stay in your ivory tower and hide behind progress reports, paperwork, and the likes. And I found that this question is often asked also, you know, by team leader, by, you know, more hands-on type of guys. I think if you have an interview with a business, very high-level executive, he or she would now have no interest in asking you this question. It's just too detailed. So, you know, at the beginning, I was, you know, as I was saying, there was once where I was asked this question, and I said, you know, if I focus too much on the detail, there's a chance I could lose sight of the bigger picture, and therefore the project could get out of control. So I might have been right, but this answer didn't satisfy the guy. So he thought, oh, okay, oh, this guy is not going to roll up his sleeve. So since then, when I'm being asked this question, what do I say? Are you hands-on? Oh yes. I often roll up my sleeves and help the team when there is something I can do to assist. And it works much, much, much better. If they ask you this question, they have some concerns. It's not because they want to know if you get dragged in the weeds and lose sight of the big picture. No, they want to know if you are 100% committed. Next one. What type of PM are you? So for this one, it's a little bit the same as the previous ones. If you had the opportunity to have a look at the company culture or the job description, use this. So it's a bit like the interview question we saw before. If you feel that the company is very, process driven and the likes, you say that, I like to follow processes because I think they are very important in project management and the likes. If they are more result driven, you said, I understand sometimes we have to be pragmatic to get things over the line. So you can play along those lines. If there is absolutely no clue in the company's culture or that you have been able to investigate, or the job description, just play the flexibility card, I suppose. So you can say, I am flexible and like to adapt to the company culture and project management. I can be pragmatic to get quick outcomes if required, but at the same time acknowledge the value of processes, especially in project management. So don't take any risks. Don't take the risk of saying you are this type of PM and they're actually looking for another type of PM. So to finish on interview question, just to turn the tables if you like, I think there's a question that you need to ask at the end of the interview. So I cannot take the credit for that one. And that one, it's one that I've learned actually relatively recently, and that is a very good one. It's actually, do you have any concerns? So obviously, you need to ask the usual questions. You need to show interest in the company. You need to ask what type of projects do you have. But I found this one so useful. So if you ask them, do you have any concerns with my profile? Do you have any concerns with my resume? That gives you the chance now to address any concerns after it's too late. After you shake hands, they have a meeting to discuss all the interviews that they've had, and they say, oh, what about this guy? Well, I'm a bit concerned about this. If your resume sits beside another one where they didn't get this concern because they got an answer during the interview, then you are at a disadvantage. I don't know about you, but I've never had someone after an interview calling me back and say, well, we were interested, but we were just wondering about this point here. So can you answer that for us? And then we can be sure if we hire you or not. So that doesn't happen. Usually they use the interview as a final selection criteria to hire someone. So you ask them this question: do you have any concern with the interview I just gave? Did I say something that might have caused some concern? See, they could say something like, yes, I think you have a good profile, but we are just a bit concerned on the fact that you haven't worked with, you didn't mention that you work with this type of software, if you like. And you could say, well, I actually have, I didn't mention it, but I have worked with this type of software. So let's say they could tell you, well, we like your profile, but we're a bit concerned because you don't seem to have worked on project where the project manager needs to be very hands-on and work very closely with the team. And then you have your opportunity. You could say, yes, the project I'm working on, I'm practically all the time with the team, and I'm going down to a very low level of detail because I really want to get this project over the line. And they could say, it's good that we clear that one up, because that was a concern for us. But after the interview, they shake your hands, have a nice day, thanks for coming, and your opportunity is lost. So that's it for the interviews, and I believe this is it for part 2 as well. But we have a wrap up, and we'll review everything to refresh our memory. As mentioned in this part, there are no quizzes. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to have quizzes on stuff that I've created. It's a bit I didn't feel comfortable doing it, but by all means, if you wanna use it, you know, it would pay dividends. Welcome to the conclusion of part 2. Let's have a quick summary just to refresh our memory, and we will not go into detail this time, just very briefly. A visual way, if you like, to summarize what we've seen. So I have presented a framework that I've created. So it has 5 components: the expectation matrix, 4 rules, 5 artifacts to have in perfect order, dangers to look out for, and 3 things to know from memory. So the expectation matrix is just a tool that will really allow you to have an overview of every stakeholder and what they want from you. And if you can satisfy everyone within reason, then everybody would be appreciative of you, and it will be much easier to work with everybody, and if it would all be downhill. If you have an issues with one group of stakeholder and you have already the relationship, it will be so much easier to deal with it, as opposed to a group of stakeholders that you don't really know, that you haven't done your homework with. I tell you, it's going to be a huge difference. So now there's a lot of things here. It's just a one-pager to summarize everything, obviously with less details, but you know, to put things in a different order, 3 things to remember: some key stakeholder names, the project budget, the current spend, 2 or 3 key milestones, and 1 or 2 near dates. So you could argue, yes, well, that's very easy, I know that already, you know, but imagine you work on 3 or 4 projects, which is not unusual. The highest amount of projects I work on is 7. So it's okay when you have 1 project, but if you have 7 projects, remembering the budget and the spend, I tell you what, it's not that easy. So simplify. Now you don't have to know your current spend on a daily basis, obviously. We also had a look at 4 golden rules. Be mindful of the environment you're in, understand the business outcome, work with the business, speak the same language, and I cannot stress that enough, do some work on roles and responsibilities. The thing is with this, nobody would really encourage you to do this. It's not really something that is expected from the start of a project manager, but it's so important. And I think I made my point on team meetings, that the current ways that team meetings are being used, for me, is not sufficient. I need to get outcomes from meetings, not updates. We've seen some dangers. So this is good to know when there are things that could come in your way, so you can anticipate and you can be ready. So audits, government oversight, a little bit similar. Make sure you do all that is required if those, you know, come up with some requirements, so you look good and you have them already. Project resources, that's also around roles and responsibilities. Make sure that they have, you know, they are their clear responsibilities, and they don't try and throw some your way. Stakeholders, same, you know, especially the business stakeholders. Be mindful of latecomers or some stakeholders that haven't been really involved so far, so that hopefully you can work with your stakeholder matrix as well. Will help you with this, but you know, bear that in mind. So it's one thing to have a bit of a challenge with a project resource, but having a challenge with a business stakeholder is really more of a problem. And be careful with legacy issues, especially when you work in an environment that has never really had project managers in the past and they don't fully understand your role and they really want you to fix it all. And to finish, 5 artifacts to perfect. Your report should be spot on. Budget and schedule. I think this is where, if you have 3 or 4 projects, simplify to the max, to what is allowed, and keep track of all approvals. So that's a slide that we saw in part 1. Be flexible and try and bring out new quality, new focus if you want, based on the phase that you're working on. So if you are initiation, more foresight, look ahead. If you are planning, be very, very thorough. Execution, just do it. Just do it. Okay, if it's not perfect, if it's not very detailed, you just have to do it. And in closing, look back, reflect, and say thanks to the people who've really helped you with the project. Welcome to part 3 of this course, Standards and Methodologies. So in part 3 we are reviewing Prince 2 and PMP. Obviously, it's a very lengthy exercise to go through those methodology in detail. So what I thought I'll do, I will just explain how these 2 methodologies relate to the course that I've done in part 1. And then we will have a quick waterfall and agile introduction. Focusing on agile, waterfall is more or less what we have done in part 1. So let's provide a quick overview of the 2 main project management methodologies. So they are called Prince 2 and PMP. So when you look for a job and you look at the job description and job requirements, it's usually, if they are looking for certificates, it will usually be one of those 2. So I think this is a key reason why it's good to know about those methodologies. So if we take them quickly one by one for a quick introduction, the PMP stands for Project Management Professionals. You will often see that associated with PMBOK, which is a book of knowledge, which is more or less the manual, if you like, of PMP. And it's provided by a company called PMI, which is Project Management Institute. So it's based on a standards manual. So it's referred more as a standard than a methodology, but in my book, you can perfectly use it as a standalone to run your project. It's good to have a good reference manual on a lot of tools that you can use to manage a project. The other methodology is Prince 2. It means projects in controlled environments, which you never heard of, and it doesn't really mean much. But it's methodology as opposed to PMP. It has process models, it even provides you templates and the likes. And it has 2 levels of certificate. So if you want to do it, you should really aim to the practitioner. Sometimes they ask you which type of certificate you have, and it's good to have the practitioner. So those 2 exams, if you like, are quite, they are very long to learn, and it takes time. It's very time consuming. And I suppose once you've learned it, whether or not you have a chance to use it, I don't find it that obvious. Sometimes you go for interview and insist, or you know PMP or Prince 2, and when you go there, you realize that has not much to do with what you've learned in PMP or Prince 2. Wherever you go, they have their own templates, their own process anyway. So, and this is a little bit the concern that I have, is someone wanting to go into project management might be a bit scared because they don't know the PMP to the detail and the likes. But you never have a job when you get in and they say, okay, here we run projects as PMP, you can get started. Never. They always have their own processes. They have it tailored, if you like. So you having a certificate is a good way for them to know that you know about project management. You know about the theory, even if you don't fully apply it, it's good for them. It give them a good level of confidence. The overarching flow to manage a project for both types of methodology is extremely similar. As far as I know, they don't start with closing and do the execution and the beginning, so it's all very logical in a way. So you're not gonna have any big surprises with either of this methodology. But we'll see that. We'll see that in the next few slides how the my part one, if you like, relates to PMP and Prince 2. So let's start with PMP. Let's have a look and see how PMP is different or similar to what we have seen in part one. So at the beginning of part one and at the end of part one, we have introduced the idea of activities. So part one, the theory was made around 4 main phases. And on top of that, one way to look at it is to see activities under each one of those phases. So those are activities, and the reason why I went with activities was that I like the way that it's really concrete, and you can go sequentially from one to the other, and you understand that you have something to do. But obviously, as you go through those activities, there are processes and there are rules and there are things that you need to do, and you can have a look at the same thing several times, as we've seen with scope and schedule. Now, having said that, when you look at PMP, the philosophy is a little bit different, but the overall process is very similar. So that's PMP in a nutshell. So the PMP has also 4 phases. All project management method that I know of have these 4 phases. So initiating, planning, executing, and closing. That will not change. So I was saying you don't usually start with closing and do planning. So you always have a pre-project phase, a planning phase, executing, and closing. So that's a similarity between the 2 methods, if you like. Now the difference is I was going through processes and techniques, if you like, as we went. PMP, they have bundled all that into a monitoring and controlling, which is not a phase, which is more a set of rules, a set of processes, if you like. So I wanted to learn from my Prince 2 and PMP certification process and inject that into this course. What I found a little bit tedious with both PMP and Prince 2 is this. Because you learn all this technique, all these rules, and you don't really know, how they really relate in the life cycle of the project and the like, so it's all a bit fluffy. This is why I like the idea of activities. So you start here, right from the start. We got started with, something concrete. At the very beginning, we learn about the scope, and then we made our way through to closure. Now, as we have found some concepts, like for instance, budget. We had a discuss budget here. We discuss budget a little bit more here. We discuss it as we went here. And then on my large cross-reference map that I have, you can see exactly for scope or for schedule or for budget, what you do in each one of those phases. To learn my method, it's more sequential. And for PMP, if you like, it's more academic. But in the end, same 4 phases, and both methods will get you there. So scope control, cost control, schedule performance, just to give you an idea of the type of things they would put in there to monitor and control the overall project. So just to finish on PMP, in the course I call the initiating document project charter, and I've called the planning document, project management plan, and it's the way it's called in PMP. So I didn't call those documents this way because this is the way they are called in PMP, but because I think, from my experience, those are the most common names. So it's easy to transition if you like. If you want to learn PMP, you would be familiar already with those names. But that's it for PMP. Next, let's have a look at Prince 2. Welcome back, Prince 2. So Prince 2, as you can see, has the same generic flow here, but the wording is a little bit different. And we can talk about the orange parts later on. So if we focus just on the central spine here, if you like, what we called initiation and initiating in PMP, it's now called starting up, but it has the same goal. It's a pre-project to check if we will go ahead with the project and do some initial work on it. Then initiating the project, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, is for them initiating a project is planning for my method and for PMP. So it's not here. The execution is called controlling a stage, and this is what is really specific with Prince 2, is that they allow for several stages to be part of a project. So obviously you can also do that with other methods like with PMP, and you can entering execution as well here, but for them it's a little bit more standardized, if you like. It's they cater for it, so that's why it's easier for them to do some agile. There's not a big difference with the Prince 2 agile and the real Prince 2, because agile is based on stages, as we'll see. And after closing a project is closing a project. So same spine, bit of confusion with name. With starting up it's initiation. Initiating is actually planning, not 100%, but very close. And then execution, they call it controlling a stage, because they want a flexibility to have several stages. Now if we have a look at the other components, so directing a project, what is that? So it's more or less a project oversight. So it's more or less their steering committee. I mean, they don't call it steering committee, but they call it project board. It's more or less the project board as an overview of the project during all this. So it's all the interaction, all the approvals and the likes. So we obviously have those as well in this, but once again, as for PMP, they like to describe this process in a separate entity, and they call it directing a project. Same thing, but the description of the event is done in a separate part of the course, if you like. Second thing of note on the other processes that the Prince 2 has is the approvals to proceed, which they call managing stage boundaries. It's also separated. The process for this is also separated. So I have two here because it's used at the end of each stage and at the end of each initiation, but they would have only, in a course, they would have only one component called managing stage boundaries, and I would give you all the rules, if you like, and on how we can go from one stage to the other. In my view, it's approval to proceed. So all the approvals, all the going back and forth, how does it work? So it's very important for them because their method is based on the stages. So they want to make sure that when you go from stage 1 to stage 2, or when you go from the execution stage to the closing stage, they want to make sure that everything is squeaky clean and you have all the processes in place. Finally, managing product delivery. That's also something very specific to Prince 2, but that we do also in other method, but we don't formalize it in a separate part of the documentation, if you like. So it's more or less describing the handover of work between the PM and the project team. So they have a very formal way. In theory, once again, Prince 2 shows don't always do it this way, but in theory they have a very formal way for the project manager, one, to request work from the project teams, and two, to receive back work from the project team. And it works the same with a project team. Let's say you have a technical area, they would want a very specific way to get the work from the project manager here. So it works both ways, if you like. So it's how the work is handed over between the PM and the various teams working on the project. Once again, this is done implicitly in all other methods. So it's interesting. So if we have a look here, for instance, I just wanted to really mention also the point of confusion, if you like, that the starting up, they call that a project brief. In PMP we call that the project charter. And here, initiating a project document is called project initiation document, PID. So this could be confusing because in PMP we call it project management plan because it's part of the planning. But once you get over it, you realize that all those methods are pretty quite similar. Another thing of note, in Prince 2, a steering committee is referred to as a project board. And I suppose this is what I see as one of the key, interesting thing, if you like. There are formal rules on how the project manager receives project work. I could have added here in theory. So welcome back for a wrap up on those two methodologies, very popular ones. So here on this slide I've put more or less the three methods that we've seen. So this was my part one. So my part one, my method that has in part one was including all those components in orange, but I chose to embed them, if you like, in every one of those phases. Prince 2 and PMP being some very thorough methodologies that you will need weeks to learn. They have a lot of more detailed explanation of each phase and how things go from one phase to the other. As I was saying, I don't think it's necessary to learn all this to be a good project manager. For me, when you need something, you just go and get it on the spot. You don't need to know it all from day one. But at the end of the day, a project is a project. I've seen project managers being very good and they're coming from a different environment because more or less you just follow the logical way of implementing things. So here the part in blue here is pre-project. Whether you call it initiating, starting up, or initiation, it's pre-project. You get your business case together, you get some high-level cost and milestones, and that's it. And then you go into a planning phase. So you go in planning phase, which is initiating a project in Prince 2 and which is also called the planning in PMP. And what do? There's no surprise. You do very precise planning. So obviously you need some type of approval. So Prince 2 would call that directing a project. PMP would be under monitoring and controlling. So you would have the same things done, but presented differently. Execution, no surprises. I mean, you have several stages, yes, but nothing prevents me from having several stages here. We can have several implementation during a project, it's not forbidden. But to close it, then you need all the stages completed. Now Prince 2 make it look a little bit more formal, if you like. And here it's the same. You can have as many stages as you like. So managing product delivery here, it's what I find interesting. It's a more formal way, but you know, once again, when you ask a team to do something as a project manager, you just don't just send them an email and let's go ahead and do it. It is already quite formal. You have some, if it's an IT project, you have the business requirements that are being signed off. I think Prince 2, for instance, it is good for very large companies. So they would have some maybe extremely complex requirements, and they would have a lot of them. So therefore, they need to have a process around this. But most of the project, this is the existing procedures, if you like, will be sufficient to manage this. And if you are a very thorough project manager, you should be able to get some precise instructions to the team to do the work, and a precise way to get the work back from them, some type of sign-offs and the like. So it all can be done. That doesn't mean, you know, PMP cannot do one type of project and Prince 2 cannot do. So it can all be done. So you might be wondering which one to choose if you want or have to. So as I was saying, the key reason for me to get a certificate is because when you look for a job there, they want you to have a certificate to be certified. Not always. If you want to go to a project management role internally, it's also possible. I think if you look in your company and you have a look at there, okay, there's a project office there. I would really recommend, if you're really keen on becoming a project manager, instead of having to go through the certificate, applying and all this, I would recommend that you try and get there through the project office, and you say, oh, I wouldn't mind being a project coordinator there just for a few weeks, and before you know it, you'll be running projects. And I've seen that so many times. Interns running projects after a few weeks. So, and they arrive either as an admin, and after they do some coordination, and after a PM leaves, they take their place and end up running a project. So, you know, go for it. If you work in a large company and they have a project office, try and use the back door. I prefer PMP. I mean, so with PMP, there's a stronger focus on managing teams and the relationship, the communication side, if you like. This is what I really like with PMP. So the learning process for both is heavy and not always applicable, but they provide recognized certification. So that's a way to wrap it up, if you like. So yeah, so here you go, PMP, Prince 2, your choice if you want to. If you don't want to and still want to go into project management, there are other ways. Welcome back to the waterfall and agile part of this course. So we have seen Prince 2 and PMP, which are methodology or standards ways to manage projects. Now waterfall and agile are more, you know, approaches, if you like, to deliver the work of a project. So both approaches can be done with either Prince 2 and PMP as the overarching, you know, method. But when you go down actually delivering the work, there are two ways we can do it, is waterfall and agile. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at waterfall. So we've seen that agile and waterfall are different approaches to deliver the work of the project, which in other words mean different approaches to execute the project, the way we have seen in part 1. So in part 1 we saw that for a lot of projects, especially IT projects, the execution is quite standard. So the execution is the requirement gathering, which is done in planning, and then the execution is more or less design something, you build something and you test it, and after you implement it. So agile and waterfall are two different ways to go through this cycle here. What we've seen in part one was waterfall, and waterfall is usually the way a project management method is being taught. Because once you know waterfall, then it's just a matter of switching things around to go into agile. You know, waterfall and agile, you would have the same initiation here. Sometime you would have the same planning, you would have definitely the same closing, but it's more or less the execution and the end of planning when you do the requirements gathering that would change a little bit. So when I say part one, what we've done was waterfall, is that we've assumed that there's only one implementation. We said we do this once, we do this once, we do this once, and after we implement once. So that's why I said part one we were using waterfall. So let's have a look. For waterfall, during planning, we ask the business to provide us all the requirements. We say, what do you want exactly? Write this big document, put all your requirements in there, you sign them off, and you hand them to us, and we'll have a look. And then we go into execution. And then we design based on this big document there. And then we build based on this large document. And then we test based on this large document. If they want something different, if they want to change here, we've seen we just call on the change control card. We said, sorry guys, you need to go through the change request process, and it needs to be signed off before we even have a closer look at it. So we do that once, and after we do all that once, and then we implement once. Now, once is implemented, as we do that only once, we usually go into closing. Now there are times, and this is why Prince 2 has stages, when you would have several large stages. So you could have 2, 3 large stages. But most of the time, it's all only one. One big document here, do all that once, and after we implement. So you will understand when we go through Agile and how Agile is different. But for Waterfall, this is the process. Now let's have a look at Agile so we can really see what the difference is. Let's review Agile. So Agile is an iterative process to deliver the project work. It's not only once, it's iterative. And we can change and fine-tune as we go. So if we go through the loop, if you like, when the execution starts, we already obviously have a good idea of what we'll be doing. So it's usually a very large chunk of work that we've agreed to work on. So we've had, we went through our initiation, so we had the go-ahead of the project, let's say it's to deliver a software, and then we know that we need to deliver the software, but we want to give ourselves the opportunity to be able to fine-tune how the software will be implemented, for instance. So in other words, it's more of recurring activities until we get it right, more or less. So in planning, we have the go-ahead, we have the high-level requirements on what we want, the type of software or the type of or website or anything that we want. And after, we get caught into that loop. So initially, there's several requirements gathering during execution, but we might skip that one initially. We might go directly into design because we haven't started the loop yet. So we might go into design directly, and we do a first build, and we do a test internally. So this is a technical resource doing the test, and after we demo it to the client, and the client has a look at it, maybe do their own test as well, and then we implement the first draft. We've really implemented into the production, so it's live. So we've done a first loop, and the product is already live. So this is live, but there are also instances when it could just be in a test environment somewhere, and then we keep working with the business in this test environment until they are happy, and there are several loops have occurred, and then we can put it live. But If we just keep it to the scenario where we go live at every loop, I think it'll be easier to understand. So let's say we arrive in a second loop here, and the business want to change something, or they have something else in mind and they want to add it. So we do another bit of design, and we do another build, and we do another test demo, and then we implement again. The rule book says every 2 to 4 weeks, but you know, it can be any length of time if you like, but usually quite close to each other. So they call that sprints. So every 2 to 4 weeks, a piece of code, a bit of a website, a small component is added based on the latest requirement gathering here. You go through the loop and you implement. You go through the loop and you implement. Now during design, build, and also test, the teams meet very frequently. They call that daily stand-ups, so they call that scrums, to review progress and get feedback. So the whole idea is very interactive between, you know, the business, between the business analyst, between the developer, and between the tester. So they all go in front of a whiteboard, and they say, well, what do we do for the next implementation here? And they obviously have a backlog, and they decide what they will do for this time, and they review what happened in the previous day and what they're planning to do the next day. So it's very interactive, if you like. So when you compare that with Waterfall, where you have just this big bang requirements, and after this big bang design, and so it's much more interactive. We see much more of the business, and the teams interact much more. So this is where, if you also take Agile by the book, the business representative, the business analyst, the developer, and the tester, they should be in the same physical area. So this is just, I suppose, for by the book cases which, you know, don't always occur. So if we want to go a little bit deeper in our understanding of Agile, just wanted to mention the terminology here, and I put that under the advanced because, you know, hopefully with the previous slide you have a good understanding of Agile. But if to go a little bit deeper, so you would have a project, and you will break down your project into large chunks that are called epics. And then epics are broken down once again in building blocks. That's something concrete that a developer can build. So I'm using the terms build and development because Agile is mostly done for IT project where you actually have to develop / build something. So I think it's easier to use that type of IT, if you want, terminology. So you have a big chunk here. Here you have something concrete that can be implemented. So, and when you go to your daily scrums or daily meetings, what you can do is have the whiteboard broken down into 5 parts. One part where you have all your stories. You have one part where you have all the to-do, so it could be some work for a business analyst, for a developer, for a tester. You have another part where you put in progress, so that shows what is currently being done, what is to be tested, so that the development has been completed and now it's ready to be tested, and what is done. And this should go into the implementation as the next sprint. I think we should have a look at an example, maybe. Let's have a look at an example. Okay. So let's say I work on a project. It's to develop a website to sell some mountain gear, say. Okay. So I could have one epic, could be ability to view the catalog items. So I don't, I don't want to right from the start create, carts so they can put products in carts. I want them to be able to visualize only, because I want to go on the market quickly. And that's the key advantage of Agile, is you, instead of ticking all the boxes and having everything done perfectly, I want to go on the market quickly, and then I will build on that. So what I do is I have this first epic here, ability to view catalog items, And after, I create another epic, which is ability to purchase items. I really want that, but first, quick on the market. And also, also as a client, I want to have a look at this. I want to visualize it, because it's hard sometimes for a client to visualize the final product without having a look at the website, the feel, and the like. So once they see that, they say, "Oh, okay, I would like the the cart to be built this way and the like." So it's quite flexible. And this is a user story, what they call story. What we've seen in the previous slide is it's often worded this way as a search and search. I want to be able to search and search. So as a website user, I want to be able to add items to my cart. So this is a story that will go here. And this story here will be, Mr. Builder, please create a piece of code that will allow items to be added to the cart. And then when all done, they will, the team lead or whoever, or even the project manager, could say, okay, that's going to be on my next to-do list. And after, he would go into progress, test, and done. Put the story there. And then they have this as a task. So they have a different terminology, because obviously Agile working on smaller components, they need to be able to break down the activities and also the requirements into a smaller pieces. So this is why they have all these different terminology, I suppose. So that's it for an Agile overview. I think that this example makes it quite clear. Now, what we haven't seen yet is what are the advantages of Agile, although I'm sure you've already spotted some, and what are the advantages of Waterfall. So I suggest, as a to wrap things up, we have a look at the key pros and cons of Agile and Waterfall. So let's have a look at Waterfall vs Agile and see who wins. Well, the answer, it depends what you have to do, really. Say you have you're working for a government and you have an important legislative change to do, and it's not going to change, and it's gonna something for the next 5 years. So in this case, okay, I go with Waterfall, no problem. Even going with Agile is not even an option. But on the other hand, as we've seen in the previous example, if you're a client and you want to have a feel first before fully committing to all your requirements. You know what you want, your end game, you want a website, but for the final detail, you're not completely sure yet. And then you would like to try it first, because if it's a complete failure, then you could always stop. So that's another advantage. You don't have to go all the way. But let's review those pros and cons one by one. So the pro of Waterfall is it's easier to assess schedule and budget requirements. So for a project manager, in theory, it's good, it's easier. They give you a clear project scope from the start, so you know all the requirements before you go into execution. So before you go there, you have all your requirements. Another advantage is project plan can be repeatable for similar projects. So you've done it for once, another project you very similar, you can just reuse it. Now the cons. So there's a long time between drinks, more or less. So you have your requirement here. The implementation is all the way here. So all the things that could happen during this, this is why I was giving the example as a government change, for instance. That's a very good example to go in Waterfall, because you know that nothing will happen in this. But you could be in a scenario when you do your requirements here, and it's a 2-year project, and chances are things will change in these 2 years. So this is, I suppose, the disadvantage of a Waterfall is you would have to use the very heavy change request process here, change control process. And this is a bit tied up with this, where you cannot react quickly to changes, because you've done all the work here already, if you get a new requirement that contradicts a little bit, then you need to go back there, and it's a bit of a long process. And this ties in with this one as well. The change control process is heavy in a way. So if they want something different, your project office might have a fit, and they say, oh no, they need to go through all this process again. So it's very heavy in this way. Let's have a look. Agile, pros and cons. So what is great with Agile is you get a lot of customer feedback. In Waterfall, in theory, or hopefully you do it a bit differently, but in theory, they cannot see, they've done their requirements in 2020, they don't see the screen until they do the testing. It could be 2022 on a very large project. So there's not a lot of interaction, if you like. There will be some during the design. They will look at the design and the documentation, but actually seeing it, that there will be there will be much interaction with the customer. But here, very often, you implement something quick initially, and after you have constant customer feedback. So there will not be a big surprise when implementation comes. Another advantage is the project can deliver some business benefits quickly, as we've seen with the example of the mountain gear website. So you can, even if you don't have the full functionality of the website, you can already provide some very good benefits to the business, and you can show your product to the client. And this is obviously a good one. There's collaboration, and not only collaboration with the customer, but there's constant collaboration with all the team members. What are the disadvantages? I mean, the disadvantages are more driven by the type of project you work on, I suppose. So more uncertainty around schedule and costs. The budget could be allocated sometimes, so you have 6 months of a designer, a developer, and a tester, and in 6 months, after 6 months, the money stops. But sometimes it's very difficult to assess, because let's say you work on this website, Mountain Gear, and there is one small change from the business, another small change from the business, and you realize that the business really is not really sure. So and there's all the so the project takes longer, so means more cost. So it's not it's not as easy. Disadvantage, so it can get out of hands without strong oversight. So it's very important that, for instance, if you have a business person involved here, that he or she has the authority and and doesn't work too much in isolation, because otherwise it's going to be bombarding with a lot of different types of requirements. And if the business analyst or the developer are not strong enough to say, well, this is a bit contradicting what we agreed on the last sprint and the likes, it can easily get out of control. So strong oversight is really important for Agile. So it's not okay, do whatever you like, we'll let you play with the software for 6 months, but some very strong oversight, and we want to have a clear path to what the final delivery will be. The disadvantage in a client service provider scenario, that can make the client nervous, and that's something that I have experienced. Especially for the requirement here. So a client can be concerned that this will be an ongoing process, because they sometimes they do have a clear idea in mind, and they don't want to go in uncertainty of even the requirements being refined, in a design changing, and potentially in a cost is changing. So you're a service provider, you're used to working this way, but sometimes the client, I've seen clients that they just don't want it. They say there's just too much uncertainty on this, and the contract, usually a bit scary, because obviously the service provider wants to protect themselves. So to summarize, I suppose as I was saying, waterfall best suited for project with a strict budget, clear vision from the client, and likely to change. So agile is best suited for, when some components can bring business benefits early, and I think as we've seen. And when there is frequent client feedback, it's best to have them under an agile model than just during a waterfall model. So as a wrap-up, I suppose we've seen Prince 2, PMP, waterfall and agile as well. So as you've seen for Prince 2 and PMP, don't be intimidated. It's just the same way to manage projects, just sometimes with different terminology, but not always and not often. As usual, there are always things that you can learn once you're on a, on a client site or on a company site, or if you're working internally, there's always things there that you will need to learn anyway. So don't be intimidated by those standards, but get them if you're really keen to get into project management, because it's often asked. I also talk about a backdoor that you could use going through as a project coordinator initially, where they don't really require a lot of certificates and the like, and that's an excellent way to go into project management. As far as waterfall vs agile, it depends on the type of project. Don't go with agile just for the sake of going with agile because it's trendy and that's a big thing at the moment. I mean, has been a big thing for a few years, I know. But what I would say regarding waterfall and agile is you can be agile in a certain way even when you work on waterfall. Don't always wait for the final sign off. You can always get things started in parallel. Be agile in the way you interact with others. Try and we saw one of the advantage of agile is the interaction. Nothing prevents you from having strong interaction with the customer. If you're working on the waterfall project, bring them back often, even if it's not formally through these sprints every 2 or 4 weeks. Bring them in early. If you have a 12-month waterfall project, don't let them wait 12 months until they can actually see what they will get. Bring them early. So be agile as much as you can, even if you work on a waterfall project. That will pay dividends. So that's it for part 3. There is a quiz for part 3, so please don't forget the quiz. How did you go? Did you like it? Please don't hesitate if there's any queries, any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. I think there's a Q&A section. But also, if you want to get in touch, just let me know. If there's a topic that you really want more information on, if there's something else that you would like me to do. I've been thinking, for instance, doing an MS project demonstration maybe. So if there's anything and if there's enough demand, I suppose I'll be more than happy to add it to the course. If you want to leave a review, that's always helpful as well, and it would be appreciated. And in case if you want to go into project management, it has its challenges. I was not hiding them, and I think I provided you a lot of information to really make it easier for you to cover yourself if you like. But also it's a very rewarding job, and on top of that, it's the salary is not too bad. So all the best, whatever you want to do next, stay in touch.